Well, hello, COS supporters. Welcome back to another edition of COS Live. My name is Andrew Lusch. I'll be your host for this episode, and I'm also joined by Rita Peters, who's the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs. Also, my co-host, Rita, it's great to be back with you. We have some committee action coming up in Idaho in just a few minutes. We have two bills. We got our resolution, which is referred to as HCR 10, and then we also have 34 Ready, which is kind of a newer bill that we've been introducing in state legislatures, and that's going to be HCR 9. So really exciting to be with you on Monday. We've just been busy the last several weeks with committee hearings, 34 Ready, all of it. And here we are on Monday going into the Idaho House Committee on Judiciary Rules and Administration. Rita, let's get our viewers caught up. What's going on right now in Idaho?
Yeah, so they're just getting ready to start this committee hearing, as you mentioned, Andrew, supposed to start at the bottom of the hour. And our two the two resolutions that we're interested in are the only things on the agenda. So I'm expecting we should get started right around the bottom of the hour, and we will take you to live stream coverage of that as soon as it starts. Producer G's got his eye on it there on the screen. And we do expect them to hear first our 34 Ready bill. And for our viewers who aren't familiar with that, 34 Ready is the term we use for legislation that basically gets the state prepared for the nation's first ever Article 5 convention. It deals with things like how the state's commissioners for the convention will be chosen. How many will there be? What are the qualifications? Who will oversee them? And importantly, what would be the penalties if one of those commissioners tried to act outside the scope of their authority? So this is an important procedural step to prepare for the first Article 5 convention. And it's interesting because if you think about it, anyone who's not in favor of an Article 5 convention because they are afraid of the runaway or they're afraid of the process, they should be the first ones to support that 34 Ready legislation. We'll see if it plays out that way. And then, Andrew, right after HCR 9, we do expect the committee to vote today on both of these resolutions. Right after HCR 9, we will move into HCR 10, which, as you said, is our Article 5 application in Idaho, sponsored by Representative Jordan Redmond. And Andrew, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little bit nervous about this committee. We're not quite sure going in whether we have all of the votes. We're really close. So I'm on the edge of my seat, and it should be a really interesting hearing. We do have former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum on the ground. At least I hope he's there. He was supposed to be there, but plane getting in just in time to make it to this hearing. So there's a lot to be nervous about, but I know there are lots of folks out there praying that this hearing goes well.
Yeah, and don't count out Rick to really get him charged up and really give a passionate testimony. I mean, what he did in New Hampshire, it was just riveting watching him deliver the reason why the legislature or the legislator should vote in favor of our resolution. Of course, we passed in New Hampshire. We got out of committee.
Yep.
So I'm nervous too, right there with you every step of the way. There's nothing that's assured. It's real exciting, but hopes and prayers for that the committee will make the right decision and vote to move us forward. I do like though that we're doing 34 Ready because, like you said, COS has an answer for that, and it's if there's a concern about how do we choose delegates? How do we do all this stuff? There's an answer right there in 34 Ready. And, our opposition likes to try and tie us down or pin us down to there's no procedure, there's no rules, there's none of that. Well, here it is. We're spelling it out for you. Actually, you're spelling it out because you're the ones that are going to be writing in the details. So it's cool that we get to see that today as well.
All right. Well, it looks like they might be getting started. Producer G, do we have audio yet? Okay, not quite yet. One other thing, Andrew, I want to mention just to make sure our viewers know is that this year they're doing something a little bit some of our champion legislators in the state actually bundled 3 different Article 5 applications
And it looks like you're having a little bit of technical difficulty. We're not able to hear on your audio, so I'm not quite sure exactly what it is that you're saying. But we are still waiting the committee hearing. Looks like there is just they're coming in, and it's going to be a few minutes. It looks like until we really get going. So while we wait, and while Rita gets her audio back up. To get our viewers, to get everyone caught up, we have 19 states that have passed our resolution. 19 state legislatures across the country have said, yes, we need to have an Article 5 convention of states that would focus in on three topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. Now, if you've been tuning in for a while, you know that magic number that we need is 34. Once we get to 34 states, then we can call the very first Article 5 convention, and we can start discussing amendments to the Constitution that would put some checks on the federal government, specifically how it spends our money, how long people stay there, and clawing back some of that power that the federal government has taken away from. So, Rita, do we have you back?
I don't know, Andrew. Am I back?
You are back. So it's
okay.
This is what happens when we go live.
That's right. Never know what's going to happen. Well, hopefully they're going to start soon. Looks like Chair is getting ready.
In the place for pursuant to notice for the Judiciary and Rules and Administration
Here we
Committee to
go.
meet. We are called to order. I've asked the Secretary to take a silent roll. Looks like we're missing a few people that will be here. Do we have any minutes from the last meeting? Representative Hostetler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve the minutes from Thursday, February 13th, 2025.
Any comments on the motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor of the motion on the minutes, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. It's unanimous. Well, this is kind of a big day for people, and so I'm going to take some personal privilege here and talk about the hearing we're going to have here today. Today, we're going to have two bills, and people have signed up for both, but they're related. So you may testify on both bills when you testify, both HCR 9 and 10. So you don't have to feel like you have to come up a second time and say essentially the same type of testimony. That will save us time. I think we're going to get through everyone here today that is signed up to testify. You must be signed up on the list to testify. You can still sign up on the HCR, or what is it, the QR code in the back of the room. But that will eventually get cut off. And we're going to hear, for those who testify, you have 3 minutes to testify. That does not count any questions you may be answering from the committee. And when you come up to testify, please give us your name, where you reside. I don't need your address, but what town or county you're from, or an organization that you represent also. Please tell us that. So if you're from Tennessee, don't just say where you live in Tennessee, but tell me you're representing an organization. That's for the record. We may not have time to hear everyone, but I think we're going to work on that. We have a hard stop at 3:15 for testimony. So at 3:15, right around there, we're going to stop hearing testimony. I will try to get to everyone if possible. So keep in mind, committee, if you ask a lot of questions of one person, you may be eating into time of other people who are here who have traveled a long ways and they want to testify too. Judging by my emails and phone calls, there's strong passion on both sides of this bill. But I'll tell you, I have a lot of strong passion bills that come through here, but one side or the other, sometimes they're obnoxious and rude. I have not had one rude or obnoxious email or phone call regarding this bill. So I appreciate both sides on this issue for being polite and courteous in all of your talking to me, at least. I expect respectful testimony. That means you don't attack or impugn the motives of people who have brought the bill or people who are on the other side of the bill, or you will be cut off. So don't attack people. You can attack the bill if you don't like it, or vice versa. That's fine, but let's keep the testimony to the bill. With that, HCR 9 and 10 are properly before the committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative.
Would you mind further clarifying, just for my sake, because I was willing to make, or I was planning to make a motion, which I'm not going to reverse the order, but how will we proceed? So is it a suggestion that they only testify once? And will we go through testimony and then vote on them all at the same time? Or will we do like one and then further testimony on the other? Would you mind just sharing so I understand the procedure, please?
Thank you, Representative. I apologize for not being clear. We have HCR 9 and HCR 10 before the committee. When you come up to testify on one or both. It doesn't matter. We're going to go through them both at the same time for testimony and also in discussion time after that with the committee, but we will vote separately, first on HCR 9 and then HCR 10, provided there's a motion to pass those, or whatever the motion may be. Does that help, Representative? Now.
And Mr. Chairman, you're going to sneak a quick break in somewhere too.
Depends how many questions you ask, Representative. Properly before the committee is HCR 9 and HCR 10. Representative Redmond, you know the drill. Tell us what you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. For the record, my name is Jordan Redmond, representing District 3 in Kootenai County. Because we're bringing up both bills, I'll kind of explain them each to begin. So HCR 9 is often referred to as the Faithful Delegate Resolution. It sets out a manner in which delegates, properly called commissioners, will be selected for an Article 5 Convention of the States should one be successfully called. The resolution sets forth the scope of authority for the commissioners and provides a remedy for removing, recalling, or suspending commissioners who exceed the scope of their authority. This resolution creates an advisory committee which monitors the activities of the commissioners and may recommend removal of any commissioner that exceeds the scope of their authority. The whole point of this concurrent resolution is to provide safeguards and accountability to ensure that there would never be a runaway convention. Now on to HCR 10. It's well known that the U.S. is burdened with crushing national debt, a bloated bureaucracies, Congress that refuses to fix the issues that are most pressing to our country. For many years now, Congress kicks the can down the road without finding true meaningful solutions. You might say that now that Trump's in office, he's going to fix all of our problems. But an executive order from the president is not the same as the states using our constitutional rights to correct federal government shortfalls. While we need DOGE, we also need an Article 5 Convention of the States to allow to cement things in our Constitution that otherwise would be left at the whims of the next administration or Congress. This resolution is unique in that it contains 3 separate calls, one for a balanced budget amendment, one for congressional term limits, and the third being for a convention of the states. This resolution has a 7-year sunset on it. However, any or all of the calls can be rescinded at the legislature's will. This resolution will allow Idaho to add its name to the growing list of states calling for a balanced budget amendment, congressional term limits, and an Article 5 Convention of the States. Mr. Chairman, I would ask, because we do have a bit of testimony, that we could receive some of that testimony and then I could answer questions towards the end.
Thank you, Representative. That's okay with me. And we do this sometimes on bills like these that are going to take a while. We want to hear from the people, testify, and then you can hit up Representative Redmond with all your tough questions after that. And you'll be closing also.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. First up, I'm going to list 3 names at a time. First up is Kendall Shaber, followed by Debbie Delaney and Marilyn Jeffries. So Kendall Shaber, if you would come forward, please.
Actually, my name is Ann Carlson. I'm here speaking on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Idaho and its statewide membership standing in for Kendall Shaber. First, I'll give you just some background on the League. For 75 years, the League has been a nonprofit, nonpartisan, volunteer organization with a mission to provide for and support the informed participation of citizens in their government. As volunteers, we organize candidate forums, do community briefings on public policy topics, register voters, and raise funds to host our Vote 411 online voters guide. I'm here to speak on behalf of our opposition to both HCR 9 and HCR 10. Guess I'll start with 10. The League is opposed because we believe that there are many unresolved questions about the powers and processes of an Article 5 constitutional convention. Because of that, we believe that the resolution is dangerous to our American democracy and the U.S. Constitution. We believe that there is good reason that there's been only one constitutional convention in our nation's history. There are no guidelines in the Constitution governing this process, regardless of the platitudes offered in HCR 9 and HCR 10. The fear of a runaway convention is very real. Which hard-fought and won rights and liberties are you willing to gamble? How would the American people be represented? What rules would apply? How would legal disputes be settled? And how would the influence of special interests be limited? There are good reasons for why organizations as disparate as the John Birch Society, the Eagle Forum, the ACLU, and the AFL-CIO actively oppose the idea of an Article 5 constitutional convention. In conclusion, I'd like to quote the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia when asked in 2014 about having a constitutional convention. He replied, I'll read this. I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa, who knows what would come of that? Please say no to the special interests behind this effort.
Thank you. Any questions of the testifier? Seeing none. Debbie Delaney? Oh, excuse me. Representative Alfieri has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Carlson. You seem to conflate constitutional convention with Article 5 convention. Have you distinguished the differences between the two?
Go ahead and answer if you can.
Article 5, my understanding is that Article 5 allows, or in very broad terms, the calling of a constitutional convention, which maybe, maybe I better stop talking because maybe I don't understand the question.
Okay. And just as a follow-up, so there have been, is the league aware of the 40 or so state conventions that have interstate conventions that have been held since the enactment of our Constitution?
Speak through the chairman when you know how to do
sorry.
that. No, thank you.
I actually can't speak for the league on that. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of the testifier? See none. Thank you.
May I also speak to HCR 9?
I was thinking you were doing both of those, but go ahead.
I have a separate
You have
separate
about
line.
20 seconds.
Okay. Then I'll just say, let's see. We believe that HCR 9 really does not address adequately the possibility of a runaway convention. And we would like everyone to ask, what is really behind this radical remedy for perceived problems?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie Delaney, followed by Marilyn Jeffries and Craig Schoberg. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Chairman Skog, Vice Chair Alfieri, and members of the committee. My name is Debbie Delaney. I live in Parma, District 9. And thank you for allowing me to speak in favor of HCR 9. First, I'd like to mention the qualifications of commissioners as stated in Section 2 of the resolution. I will leave it up to you to read so I don't waste your time, but they go into superb detail as to the qualifications to be a commissioner for the Article 5 convention. In Section 3, 5 commissioners will be named and passed by the majority of those present and voting in the Senate and House of Representatives in a regular or special session of the legislature. It is outlined how a commissioner may be recalled or suspended for any reason by the legislature. Please remember the convention will likely be live streamed and watched closely to make sure all procedures are followed as outlined. In Section 5, each commissioner must take an oath to abide by the instructions given, and they understand that they can be recalled or suspended from duties if they fail to abide by the directions. Their oath will be filed with the Secretary of State and becomes part of their credentials. Quorum. Each delegation will consist of 5 commissioners who choose a chairperson. That person will be the one to cast the state's votes and speak to the media. If a member of the delegation fails to follow the rules, again, they can be recalled or suspended. They can also choose a different chairperson as needed. As you see, the writers of this resolution worked hard to include all aspects of disobedience by the commissioners. I appreciate their forethought. Our opponents are quick to point out how commissioners can go rogue and off the rails with crazy ideas to cause a runaway. I have no fear of that happening. For the delegation to make decisions, a quorum must exist, which is a majority of the delegation. They must stay in the parameters listed in HCR 10, which are term limits, fiscal restraints, and to limit power and jurisdiction of the federal government. I would like to let you know there are 12 states who have already passed the 34-ready resolution, also called the faithful delegates. The states continue to work in tandem to do the best job they can to call an Article 5 convention and be successful to save our republic. Have no fear. Thank you for your time and thank you for your service. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Any questions of the presenter or the testifier? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Jeffries, followed by Craig Soberg and Billy Norp.
Chairman Skagg and Vice President or Vice Chair Alfieri and members of the committee. My name is Marilyn Jeffries, and I am from Middleton, Idaho, District 10. I am testifying in favor of HCR 10. Please vote for it. Let's make permanent the actions of President Trump that he's taking to decrease the size of our federal government. Recent revelations by Elon Musk and Doge show how deep the corruption and mishandling of our taxpayer funds have been. Trump wants to eliminate the departments that are misusing taxpayer funds and eliminate wasteful spending. Trump has targeted what he and his allies are calling the deep state. Some of Trump's actions could gain bipartisan support, but could not be made permanent. The next president could completely return the deep state to power. Trump needs a convention of states to propose the amendments to make his changes permanent and return power to the states. Vice President J.D. Vance and the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, support Convention of States. In addition to J.D. Vance and Mike Johnson, here is a list of high-profile Trump appointees that also support the Convention of States. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, has stated, "The Convention of States project is the only constitutional pathway for citizens to save our republic by restoring to her citizens Article 5 of our Constitution underscores the duty of active citizenship, and I am proud to stand with millions of volunteers in this effort." COS supporter Brooke Rollins has been nominated by President-elect Trump to become Secretary of Agriculture. She stated, "The American people are mad and they're looking for a way to say no more." Our founders, in their brilliance, gave us a tool for that, and it's the Article 5. Our Trump nominees are now in favor. Other Trump nominees are also in favor of COS. Marco Rubio, Mike Huckabee, Carolyn Levitt, Dan Bishop. I ask you to vote for HCR 100 and to make President Trump's changes permanent. I thank you for your service and for your time.
Any questions of the testifier? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Craig Schoberg.
My goodness, good day. Thank you. There's so many things that get you excited about trying to help our country. I've been in business for 30 years. I've gone through the hopes of trying to get these swamp creatures and the people who have just been
Give us your name and where you reside.
Oh, Craig Schoberg, Greenleaf, Idaho, over there. Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Ardent Patriot is my nickname. Okay. So the swamp breeding grounds has gotten so out of hand. We've got some good people in there working it right now. Thank goodness. The 6th article is all about what they're doing right now. We need an Article 6. And there are some grifting schemes and some re-election processes in the USAID, and all these things we're uncovering right now are phenomenal. That is re-implementing Article 6 of our Constitution, not Article 5. Article 5 has been touted as something that's going to help us. I thought it was a great idea till I started doing my homework. And then I find out that Mr. Meckler is pontificating that Article 5 convention is a convention of states and not a federal constitutional convention. Y'all own a copy of Black's Dictionary, Black's Law? There's no sense of article of convention of states. It does not exist. So what are they pushing? Okay, you go back in history as to what's happened to us as we've been sold bill of goods. In 1911, Idaho signed on and ratified the 16th Amendment. Anybody remember that one? 16th Amendment income tax. It was going to be on $1,500 income, 1%, not to be too much. And what did they do to that guy? He was an alarmist when he said it's going to get as high as 10%. So that didn't go out quite the way they sold it to us, did it? Okay, how about the Duma in Russia when Lenin and the boys came in there in 1917 and had the revolution? All those people said, oh, we're out of here, get it. They filled right in and took over, didn't they? All the negotiations went out the door because they gave up. I'm not giving up on the truth because we've got so many things being sold to us that aren't what they are. 1911, Idaho did the income tax thing, right? And then it got ratified in 1913 with an illegal quorum. December 23rd, 1913, they voted for an income tax thing illegally. The book called The Law That Never Was. I traveled with Bill Benson for 2 weeks with Howard Phillips in South America and understand from that gentleman who wrote the book how fallacious that was. So there's a lot of fallacious things that happen. I do not trust the situation we're having right now. We've got a lot of pretension that there's no such thing as a convention. Look in your book. Look in your Black's Law book. Is there a convention of states? No. It's all concocted to help you believe it's going to work. And it's a great idea. Article 5 is not necessary. We got Article 6 working for us really good with Trump and Musk and these guys cleaning house. There's my 3 minutes.
Very good. Any questions of the testifier? Thank you, Craig. Okay, next up is Billy Norp, followed by Leah Southwell and Nina Beasley.
I understand we'll be able to choose which one we want to do, 9 or 10, but we still have 3 minutes, right?
You have 3 minutes to do with as you please on those 2 bills.
Thank you. Chairman Skog, Vice Chairman Alfieri, members of the committee. My name is Billy Norp. I am from Meridian, Idaho, House District 20. I am testifying in favor of both HCR 10 and HCR 9. For my testimony, I want to tell you a little bit about the leaders of the Convention of States movement. They're Michael Ferris, Rick Santorum, Mark Meckler, and Robert Nadelson. Constitutional attorney Michael Ferris has argued before the appellate courts of 13 states, 8 federal circuit courts of appeals, and twice before the Supreme Court of the United States. He is one of the few living attorneys who has successfully litigated an Article 5 case. As founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, Ferris spearheaded the effort to legalize homeschooling in all 50 states. He has also founded the Patrick Henry College, the preeminent pre-law college in America, where he taught law for 18 years. He served as president of Alliance for Defending Freedom, the preeminent religious liberty organization in the United States. ADF won 11 of 12 Supreme Courts on his watch. Robert G. Nadelson is a law professor of 25 years. Nadelson's research has been shared and cited repeatedly at the U.S. Supreme Court, federal appeals courts, state Supreme Courts, both by parties and by the state. He is widely acknowledged as the nation's preeminent scholar on Article 5, having written the only treatise on it, which I have a copy of here, if any of you would like to take it, that describes all the details of the law of Article 5. He knows what he's talking about, and so do they. Mark Meckler co-founded the largest Tea Party group in America before co-founding Convention of States Action. As president, Mark has led this organization to have a grassroots presence in all 7,000 plus state legislative districts in the nation. You will hear later from Rick Santorum. The Honorable Rick Santorum is Senior Advisor for the Convention of States. Rick served 2 terms in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, where he gained a reputation of one of the nation's leading fighters for fiscal responsibility. Convention of States leaders are proven, lifelong principle fighters for liberty. They are battle-tested and refined by the fire. They have accomplished big things for the right for freedom and for proving and have proved their credibility. I trust them and this movement that they lead, and so do thousands of others, including Vice President Vance, Speaker Mike Johnson, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture, and on and on. All the names are listed in the paper you have in front of you.
All right, we need to wrap up, Mr. Norton.
I will. I ask you to join with this long list of supporters and the 28,000 Idahoans who trust them and vote for HCR 10 and HCR 9. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Leah Southwell, Nina Beasley, and then John Malloy.
Mr. Chairman, Leah Southwell from Kootenai County. Got up at 2:30 in the morning to be down here to testify, so I appreciate the time. I was hoping that we were testifying on 2 separate bills and we get 2 separate times to talk about this. So I hope we could get a little bit more time later on. 3 minutes for 2 separate bills is not going to cover it. But what I would like to say is, number one, we are all here in the same room talking about the same issue. It's an Article 5 convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. It doesn't matter what you call it. That's what you're applying for. Both of these resolutions are discussing that. My opposition to HCR 9 is that this is nothing more than a fantasy wish list of what Idaho hopes that a convention, how it would be run. Would you be interested in hearing how Congress thinks that it will be run? Well, that's how I decided to look at it. So I looked up the Article 5 Convention to propose constitutional amendments from the Congressional Research Service done in 2014. They've already studied this extensively. If this ever comes to this, they think they know what the rules will be, and it's not what you here in Idaho are claiming on your bill. That's your wish list. You are applying to Congress, and Congress gets to set the rules on this. They claim, while the Constitution is silent on the mechanics of an Article 5 convention, Congress has traditionally laid claim to broad responsibilities in connection with a convention, including receiving, judging, and recording applications, the procedures, setting the time and time allotted, determining the number and the selection process for its delegates. They have the choice to say, no, Idaho, you don't choose your delegates. We will tell you how the delegates are chosen. They get to set the internal convention procedures and set the formula for allocation of votes amongst the states. This one state, one vote is not noted anywhere in the Constitution or anywhere else. It's a wish list. And this is what's sold to the smaller states for the smaller states to feel that they will have the same power as the larger states will have. What other claims have been made by Congress and a bill that passed through the Senate was that they would decide on the allocation of the votes, and they would decide it based the same way that Congress is. So based on population, not one state, one vote. So what you're proposing here is a wish list. It is not what Congress would agree upon. Then what I'd also like to discuss is the claim that you can control delegates. If you look at historical precedents, which I beg of you, do not even vote on this if you do not understand what the historical precedence was. This has only happened one other time in 1787. The delegates were sent there with very clear commissions of what they were allowed to do. What actually happened was the delegates did agree, and I have it in their own words, and I asked for that to be passed out, that they came to a point where they said, you know what, we are going beyond our authority. We are going beyond what our
I'll need you to
commission
wrap
said.
up, and we did get that document.
What they did was they appealed to the higher power. I'm not in any way saying they did anything illegal. They claimed that there was a power, and if they appealed to the people, they didn't have to bring it back to the commissioners, to the states
I need you to
that
wrap
gave
up.
them their commissions. For this reason, I ask you to oppose both 9 and 10.
All right, thank you. One question from me.
Yes.
How were the roads coming down for you at 2:30?
Bad, scary, scarier than heck. In fact, they were shut down almost until we got to the mountains, and we weren't sure we were going to make it. So it was scary.
I'm glad you made it okay.
Me too.
All
Thank
right.
you.
No questions? We have a question.
Oh, hey.
Representative Rubel?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Southwell. I know we have a lot of people, but you are, I think, uniquely expert in this area. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about why you feel that the ratification procedure wouldn't provide adequate assurance that this couldn't get out of hand, and a little bit more color around, what you know about the historical precedent around that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So the debate happened at the convention. What do? We're here. We're now talking about rewriting another constitution. We're talking about throwing about the Articles of Confederation and replacing it with our current constitution. They debated this heavily. Some of those went back to their commissions and said, we don't have the authority to do this. We're out of here. New York left and said, we don't have the authority to do what you're trying to do here. Some of them said, we don't have the power, but we should proceed with this. Others said, we don't have the power, but should proceed anyhow. None of them said anywhere that we can find in any documentation that they stayed within their powers that they were granted to them. What they did was, in their debate, they had to agree on how is it that we're going to proceed then. And they said there is a higher power than the state legislators. They've sent us here with commissions, but if we're going to go outside the boundaries of those commissions, then the only way we can justify this is to appeal to the highest sovereign in the nation, and that is we the people. So they appealed to the ultimate sovereign power, the people, for their authority. They went back, instead of bringing back the proposal to the state legislators, they said, no, we're going to appeal to the people. We want state conventions, and the people will decide whether they want these changes that we've brought forth in an entirely new constitution. So was it a runaway? If the definition of a runaway means that they went outside their commissions, yes, it was a runaway. Was it a runaway as in it went bonkers crazy and they did horrible things? No, they actually came up with a superior document than the Articles of Confederation. But there's no doubt about it, they did absolutely replace the Articles of Confederation with a whole new document, when many of those, and I have the commission reports on each one of the states, many of those commissions said you were sent there to revise the Articles of Confederation. Many of them said the sole purpose was to revise the Articles of Confederation. How can it be stated that that was not a runaway when they admit that they went outside the powers of their authority? Did that answer your question? Any other questions?
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess I can call you Lee because we've spent
You
many
may.
hours discussing
Yes.
over the last few days. I want to go back to what you said regarding the Congressional Research
Yes.
Service, talking about how Congress would have the authority to set number of delegates and time and things of that nature. Where in the Constitution is that set forth?
It isn't.
Through the
That-
chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
We do
Chairman.
that to slow things down. Emotions
Yes.
run high.
Yes.
So start with
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the issue that all of us are here debating today. Where is the authority? Article 5 is virtually silent. It's a long run-on single sentence that we're talking about for there being two methods. This is only one little part. It doesn't lay out what the rules or anything else would be in Article 5. So then you have to look at what would the judges determine? What would Congress say? What would the states say? What's the likely outcome of this? And the issue is that many Supreme Court justices agree on this. We have no idea what could come out of this. This is likely going to go to the Supreme Court justices. The Supreme Court is going to have to decide all these things because it is so silent for Article 5. I would dare to say there's a darn good reason why we haven't had one since 1787, and that is it is so vague, anything can happen. So you, the legislators, laying out for your delegates is one thing. Your delegates, you may be able to control your delegates, but if you unlock this convention, once it begins, if you don't like the way it goes, if it doesn't go according to your rules in our HC 9, if it doesn't go in accordance to rules, the best thing that you could do is pull your delegates back. It doesn't stop the convention from happening. The delegates themselves are the ones who will make the rules, a lot of the rules. Many of you have been to state conventions for your party, I would assume. What's the first committee that meets? Once the delegates are commissioned or approval of their, what's it called? Commission, no, there's a word when your credentials, thank you. Once the credentials has happened, it goes to the rules committee. It is the delegates themselves who will write the rules. The framework, according to Congress, and you're applying to Congress, they will lay out the framework. And then the delegates are the sovereign body of a convention. They can change the rules. They can change the ratification process, as was done in 1787. In 1787, the rules were,
Okay,
according to the Articles.
we're chewing up a lot of time
Okay,
of other people.
in accordance to the Articles of Confederation, any ratification had to be done by 100% of the states. During that convention, they said, we'll never get that passed. Let's make it easier. Let's change it to 3/4. Could that happen again? Could they choose to make the ratification process simpler?
One
Mr.
follow-up?
Chairman, I do have a follow-up. So the point I was trying to get to, Leah, was that if there are no rules in the Constitution as to how a convention is to be composed, again, number of delegates, things of that nature, doesn't it then fall under the 10th Amendment, rather, for the states to decide how it's going to happen?
Mr. Chairman, this is actually one of the official roles of Congress. Congress is in charge of this. That is a legitimate function for them to discuss anything that pertains to the Constitution.
I don't
So
see
no,
it
in
there.
this case, I would say no, it is not. It is actually the valid role of the Congress to be in charge of any amendment process. Did that answer it? No? I'm sorry.
Thank you for your testimony. We're not going to allow any more questions, and you did a good job, but we need other people to be up here to
Yes,
speak
thank
as
you.
well. So next up is Nina Beasley. When you're ready.
Good afternoon, members of the House Judiciary Rules and Administration Committee. My name is Nina Beasley. I'm a resident of Kootenai County, Rathdrum. I ask that you please oppose HCR 9 and 10 and preserve and protect the U.S. Constitution. It is the responsibility of every citizen to defend the Constitution, as well as every elected officer who has taken an oath to do so. I'd like to draw your attention to lines 26 through 19 in HCR 10. It says, whereas the citizens of the state of Idaho believe that it is in the best interest of the people of the United States to amend the Constitution of the United States in order to adopt a balanced budget amendment and to address the areas of overreach in the federal government. I find that statement interesting because we had a town hall in Kootenai County within the past year, and legislatures in legislative districts 2, 3, 4, and 5 that were present were asked if they supported an Article 5 convention. Then the moderator asked the crowd of 200 plus people if they supported an Article 5 convention, and only 2 raised their hands for it and the rest raised their hands against it. I'd also like to draw your attention to lines 30 through 35. It states, whereas as early as 1979, the 45th Idaho legislature enacted House Concurrent Resolution Number 7, calling for an Article 5 convention for the purpose of preparing and submitting to the states an amendment to require, with certain exceptions, that the total of all federal appropriations may not exceed the total of estimated revenues. The point I want to make in this is that what is interesting is 20 years later, in 1999, the state of Idaho took action in Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 129 to repeal all previous calls for an Article 5 convention, which action included the following statement. Former Justice of the United States of America, Warren E. Burger, former Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Arthur J. Goldberg, and other leading constitutional scholars agree that such a convention may propose sweeping changes to the Constitution. Any limitations or restrictions purportedly imposed by the states applying for such a convention or conventions, to the contrary notwithstanding, thereby creating an imminent peril to the well-established rights of the citizens and the duties of various levels of government. We're talking about our U.S. Constitution. It's something I read every day along with the scriptures. It's something that I treasure, and it's something that I don't want people messing with, especially if they're not representatives elected by the people. I have an issue with that. So again, there's not a problem with the Constitution. That's not the problem. And there are other ways to solve those problems. And so again, I do ask that you please oppose HCR 9 and 10. Thank you.
Any questions of the testifier?
All right, I guess I was
Alfieri.
clear.
You have
Awesome.
one. You have one question.
Oh.
One question.
All right.
Nina, don't go away.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Chairman. Nina, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
How do you feel about amendments to the Constitution?
Well, one thing, those are people that are elected by the people directly, and I really appreciate that. And there's only a couple in there that I would like to repeal. But again, there's a lot of work that we have to do. I feel I'm very grassroots, local level, precinct committeemen. Go out, talk to your voters, knock on their doors. That's where the real hard work comes. And if you want to get the things you want to do, you should go talk to those people and ask them to petition and to get good people elected so that we can make those things happen. But I do not think that this is the right way to do it. Thank you. Any more questions?
See
All right.
none. Next up is John Malloy, followed by Judy Kaler.
Okay, I'm John Malloy, calling from Post Falls. It took me a while to unmute myself.
You're doing
Thank you for allowing this testimony remotely. I'm an opponent of HCR. I am opposed to HCR 10 and 9 for that matter. And opponents know that the threat of a runaway convention is real, yet the proponents will respond with a "nuh-uh," and we say "uh-huh," and they say "uh-uh," and we say "uh-huh," and it goes on and on. But the proponents then suggest that we do a Nancy Pelosian thing and pass it so we can see what's in it. And that, of course, is very dangerous. At a small meeting last Friday, I was told by a spokesman of the Convention of States organization that the Constitution is not a living document. It is fixed, unchanging over time. And then he admitted that it is continuously being ignored by Congress. And to that, I say, bingo, it's the people violating the oaths of office that are creating this problem of the oversized federal government. So a solution is not to open the Constitution to a convention that James Madison said, quote, would no doubt contain individuals of insidious views who, under the mask of seeking alterations popular in some parts, might have the dangerous opportunity of sapping the very fabric of the Constitution, unquote. Rather, a solution would be to educate the electorate, as Thomas Jefferson admonished, so that honorable Constitution-minded people would be elected. Now, another spokesman for the Convention of States organization said at that Friday meeting, quote, well, we cannot keep doing what we've been doing, end quote, to which I reply, and I guess you wouldn't be surprised. I replied, bingo. The November 5th, 2024 election gave us pretty sound evidence that the electorate has been educating itself and decided to stop doing what we've been doing. The abuses of the Constitution are now in the crosshairs with a lot of talk about balancing the budget without the need for a constitutional convention or even an amendment for that matter. It's important to remember too, especially here, that the states, through a compact among themselves, created the federal government with the Constitution that enumerates the few and limited powers it shall have. The states are the guardians of liberty against abuses of power by the federal government. Their duty to protect liberty can be fulfilled by nullifying and ignoring any mandate of federal law that is not pursuant to the Constitution we already have. The Constitution, about which James Madison argued, quote, "It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of that almighty hand which has been so frequently and signally extended to our relief in the critical stages of the revolution. Others have referred to the divine guidance which they felt led to the Constitution we have."
Judy Kaler.
There I am, I think. Hi, my name's Judy Kaler. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead and tell us where you're from and who you represent.
I'm from Nevada City, California. And I want to say that I'm opposed to both bills. The delegate bills are deceptive because they falsely assure legislators that they have the power to control delegates to a convention called by Congress under Article 5. Article 5 says that Congress shall call the convention, and then Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has the power to make all the laws necessary to carry out the constitutional powers. Leah told you what the Congressional Research Report said. Power flows from the people in our constitutional republic. Delegates to a convention would have more power than state legislatures, Congress, and the president combined. As sovereign representatives of we the people, they would have the self-evident right to alter or to abolish our form of government, as recognized by the Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. They are not subject to state law per the limiting language of the applications and delegate bills. Therefore, delegate bills are useless for their stated purpose. But what makes delegate bills dangerous rather than just useless is that some legislators opposed to an Article 5 convention will vote for the application when lobbyists falsely assure them that the bill would prevent a convention from running away. This can cause the application to squeak by, and that would trigger the very runaway convention that lobbyists insist the delegate bills will prevent. And James Madison invoked the Declaration of Independence in Federalist 40 when he justified that the delegates against their commissions had rewritten the Constitution instead of just amending the Articles of Confederation, and that could happen again. I also wanted to say some things on HCR 9. Do I have more time for that, or is it the same?
You do, go ahead.
Okay, so I ask you to vote no on HCR 9. Convention proponents celebrate George Mason for the opportunity to rein in an out-of-control government using the convention method of Article 5. They say that George Mason said, are we so naive as to believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own power? But no one at the Constitutional Convention thought that Article 5 was meant to restrain a tyrannical government, including George Mason. The convention lobby made up that to push their agenda. Instead, what Mason did say, he made the point that if a provision of the Constitution should prove to be oppressive, the people should have the right to propose amendments if Congress refuses to do so, to fix that provision. Thus, the framers gave us Article 5 to fix defects in the Constitution. No one can rein in the federal government with an amendment because you can't take away powers from Congress that were never granted to Congress by the Constitution in the first place. To rein in the federal government, the framers gave us the 10th Amendment, and they gave Congress only enumerated powers like declaring war and coining money, and most of them are in Article 1, Section 8.
All right, Judy, you need to wrap up now.
I'm sorry?
It's time to stop.
Oh, could I just finally end here? Just with one thought. I want to say a word about the sunset clauses in 2031 that all the applications have. Proponent groups don't let sunsets expire. As soon as they can, they introduce the same applications, but without the sunset. The new application supersedes and rescinds the
All right,
old
Judy, I
one.
need you to stop.
My
People
written
need to
testimony
testify.
tells you more detail. And
Thank you, Judy. Stop.
please vote
Stop.
no on vote. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for calling in. Bye.
Bye.
Shirlene Allen. I owe you a few seconds. I hit the timer too early. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Skog, Vice Chairman Alfieri, and members of the committee. My name is Sherilyn Allen. I reside in Star, Idaho, in District 10. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today in support of House Concurrent Resolution 9 in support. Groups who oppose the Article 5 Convention of States infuse their arguments with emotion and fear, claiming that we won't have control over a convention once it begins. They are afraid that the delegates will go to the convention and do whatever they want, with no regard to the will of the people who sent them there. HCR 9 addresses those fears. In accordance with historical precedents and the wording of Article 5 itself, HCR 9 provides our legislature with clear instructions and criteria for selecting, commissioning, and overseeing delegates who will act as our agents when the Article 5 Convention for Proposing Amendments is called. We trust our legislators. In a U.S. Supreme Court case called Chiafalo versus Washington, the court concluded that, quote, among the devices states have long used to achieve their object are pledge laws designed to impress on electors their role as agents of others. A state follows in the same tradition if, like Washington, it chooses to sanction an elector for breaching his promise, unquote. The same rationale applies to commissioners at an Article 5 Convention of States. While only individuals with honorable intentions and a vested interest will apply to be a delegate, it is our duty and in our best interest to select qualified commissioners. HCR 9 provides clear instructions for selecting, overseeing, and potentially removing commissioners in accordance with current legislative practice. I like that it specifically says that no commissioner can vote to alter the language of the Bill of Rights or the one state, one vote rule. I also like that felony offenses prohibit individuals from serving as delegates. This is more restrictive than current practice in Congress and should be considered for commissioners to an Article 5 Convention of States. Any legislator who has any concerns whatsoever about controlling and limiting an Article 5 convention should absolutely support this measure. Please support House Concurrent Resolution 9. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the testifier? Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and ma'am, and Charlene, thank you for being here today. My question, since you talked about HCR 9, is on page 4, lines 1 through 8. It looks like commissioners are muzzled because they cannot speak to the media about convention business during the convention or during any temporary recess, except for one person, one of the 5. And then in 1 through 3, lines 1 through 3, each commissioner shall take care to avoid communicating to any person outside the delegation that the delegation is divided on a question on which the delegation has taken a formal position, including but not limited to casting the vote. It looks to me like the freedom of speech of the commissioners is muzzled. And can you comment on that? Am I misreading these two paragraphs?
Ms. Allen, answer if you're able through the chair.
I am unable to respond to that, but I imagine there are others in our group who can do that. So thank you.
See no other questions. Thank you for your testimony today. I need to switch screens, so just a moment. Teresa Halderson. When you're ready.
Great. Good afternoon, Chairman Skog, Vice Chair Alfieri, and members of the committee. My name is Teresa Halderson. I reside in Meridian in District 10. Our U.S. Constitution, which every elected official takes an oath to defend, delineates the rules of our country. It is the game book, so to speak, of how our country runs, this game of self-governance. We the people, and you, our legislators, are supposed to play offense. We're supposed to be the offense coaches. However, that's not happening right now. I think we can all agree that we are now playing defense more than offense. Right now, how much money, time, and resources does our Attorney General spend fighting government overreach? Why are we entertaining bills right now for anti-mask and anti-mRNA vaccines? How is it that the federal government can mandate where windmills farms be built and do so against the opposition of local communities? So you have all received these two documents. This first one, along with probably a couple others, this first one talks about the statistics of the polling that has taken place nationwide, that talks about how the majority of Americans in all demographics and all political parties are in favor of term limits, federal spending reductions, and limiting federal overreach. The second document that you've also received is an Article 5 process map, so to speak. It is in each box, it lists the most frequently asked questions. So those answers are already built into this form. On the back, I should say, it also covers and answers those questions regarding the runaway convention and how delegates are controlled, as was referred to by Mrs. Allen. On the back side of this form is the possibilities box. And this is a list of the proposed amendments that came out of the two legislative simulations that have been held, as well as the Article 5 grassroots experience that I attended last September. Some of these proposals I want to share with you were securing federal elections, restoring the Commerce Clause, restoring the General Welfare Clause, locking Supreme Court justices down to 9. We could limit terms of service for Supreme Court justices, federal judges, members of Congress. We could restrict federal government from owning, regulating, or controlling Idaho lands and mineral rights. We could give Idaho the ability to revoke any action of Congress or the president or administrative agencies that violate our state laws and our Constitution. So with that, I ask you to please support both articles, both concurrent resolutions 9 and 10, and stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the testifier? See none. Thank you for your testimony. Oh, I forgot to say names. McKay Cunningham, followed by John Green. McKay Cunningham. Oh, Representative Rubel.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cunningham let me know he was not going to be able to attend today.
All right, thank you for that. McKay Cunningham, for the record, is against that number 10 and 9. John Green, followed by Ronnie Linsman. When you're ready, sir.
I'm ready if you're ready. Chairman Skog, Vice Chair Alfieri, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name's John Green. I'm from Star, Idaho, District 10, and I'm speaking in favor of HCR 10, and I urge you to vote for it as well. I decided I'd take a little bit different approach and talk about sort of some personal examples of how the federal government is overreaching. I've been a taxpayer since I was 16 years old, and I'm now retired and see the value of my retirement savings dwindle almost on an annual basis as our borrow and spend government devalues the dollar with runaway spending. You know, they're spending it on things like non-binary language training for Sri Lankan journalists. Yeah, that's really a thing in the State Department. All the while that sort of thing is going on, we have runaway spending, and even though we're flirting with fiscal disaster at the federal level, our elected representatives seem to spend lifetime careers in Washington and then retire as very wealthy people. My son Joseph was a victim of the Merrick Garland censorship program at the Justice Department. His social media accounts were all canceled because he dared to post scientific data that was counter to the Fauci COVID protocols, a direct violation of freedom of speech. I have a close personal friend who's a retired FBI agent living in Nampa. His daughter was interrogated by federal agents at her home because her cell phone pinged in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, even though she was miles away from the Capitol riot. Again, that's not the way our federal government is supposed to work, but it's exactly what happens when we lose accountability over our federal government. Last November, we elected a new president to reestablish accountability. Unfortunately, our public servants don't care about our wishes, and they're fighting back. President Trump is being prohibited from controlling his own executive departments by injunctions issued by activist judges at the bureaucrats' requests. That's why people like Vice President Vance, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, Secretary of State Rubio, and others are supporters of an Article 5 convention. They understand that an ailing system requires a systemic treatment, such as the emergency procedure our founders provided, the second clause of Article 5. I hear the opponents caution against its use, but I feel like we're watching Uncle Sam die while we argue about whether to apply CPR or not. We should be arguing about what's going to happen if we don't take corrective action. I urge you to support HCR 10 for an Article 5 convention and make Idaho one of the states that's stepping up to aid our ailing republic.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Any questions of the testifier? All right, next up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ronnie Linsman.
Ronnie Linsman, Canyon County, I'm District 23. And I just want to say that in the descriptions of this convention, they reference the parliamentarians who give direction to those who are the chairs or whatever. Who's going to pick those parliamentarians? Who's going to have the authority to do that stuff? We talk all nicely about how this is going to be so organized and so pleasant, but I would remind you about the 2014 Idaho Convention, Republican Convention, where we didn't even get to elect our administration because of the parliamentary shenanigans that went on. That is something to be concerned about. And then it was September 23, 2013, Mark Meckler spoke in front of the American Legislative Exchange Council. And in his remarks, and I gave you this cute little paper. If you got it, you can go look it up. He declared it doesn't matter how great the risk is. If we lose the country. Well, I would tell you, I say we jump on the Trump train and Doge, and we just go smiling all the way to the end of this administration and see what happens. Put this thing on in the freezer and just let it lay there for a while. And then when one of the comments was spoken about going to the people, that the people were the higher authority. Another thing that Mark Meckler said at that ALEC meeting was he was persuading legislators, we need you. And he declared, you really don't need people to do this. You just need control over the legislature, and you need money, and we have both. So sounds a little controlling to me. And then they claim that Soros isn't in on any of this stuff. Well, I have the video. He had a video where they were talking about Soros, and we're not afraid of Soros and all of his power and money. But Soros has said in his book, the main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States. And then he says, changing the attitude and the policies of the United States remains my top priority. If we think he isn't going to be hard and heavy in the middle of this, we just aren't thinking very clearly. And then also California, you know, they've called for an amendment for gun control. And then in the simulated
Ronald Lee,
convention.
we'll have to wrap up.
Oh, time has expired. Oh, I have so many things that, anyway, I've been studying this since 2013. And I hope that you will take the time to look at what I highlighted in here, because I didn't say it, they did.
Thank you. There may be questions. Any questions for the testifier? See none. Thank you for your time. Okay, let's see. Next up. Scott Perrin, followed by Lori Wilder. Welcome, Scott.
Hi.
Introduce yourself and tell us what you know.
Scott Perrin, Idaho County, District 7. Representative Redmond, I came down to make a comment. Representative Redmond was trying to get a solution. I agree that our national debt and the bureaucracy supporting it is a problem. That debt seems to me to be something like Never Never Land in Peter Pan or Pleasure Island out of Pinocchio. I think the answer, though, may be the solution that Representative Redmond's looking for may be right in front of us. I think that the document or instrument that was written and put into the application of the preface of the Declaration of Independence may be the answer. If properly, the intent properly understood and applied with the general welfare clause, the commerce clause, the supremacy clause, I don't think we would not have the debt we have, and our tax would be minimal. 250 years ago, the general commerce clause wasn't about manufacturing, it was about shipping. So how do meanings change? One, an example, in 16th century, Romeo and Shakespeare wrote a line, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Most people today would say, wherefore means, where are you, Romeo? Are you in the hedges? Are you in the bushes? 16th century, wherefore meant why. Why, Romeo, meaning, Romeo, why am I in love with you? The Capulets, We've been in fighting for a long time. Why? Understanding the original meaning intent brings greater understanding to that scene, and you can understand, I could better understand Juliet's dilemma. So I think the answer might be right in front of us. I don't know that we need a convention. I think we need a better understanding of the original intent and meaning and apply that. And I would recommend that, or what I've helped me is not just the Constitutional Convention notes from 1787, but more importantly, the state conventions that ratified it. They argued it. What is the meaning of this? And so I'm for solving the problem, and I'm for maybe tabling and thinking about this. The answer might be in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the testifier? Seeing none, let's see, Lori Wilder. Introduce yourself and tell us what you know.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lori Wilder. I live in Boise, District 22. I'm a volunteer for Convention of States, and I'm here to ask you guys to support Resolution HCR 10 and pass it through the committee. As an American, I am concerned for this country. The federal government has grown so big that the states no longer have a voice. Our founding fathers included Article 5 in the Constitution for this very reason. I recently took a class on the U.S. Constitution and did not realize how much all three branches of government have exceeded their authority. We need to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The federal government overreach, just to name a few, is in our education, our healthcare, and recently in Idaho with the Bureau of Land Management and the Lava Ridge Wind Project. The national debt is $36 trillion. I was here last year when the resolution passed through the committee, but it didn't go through the House or the Senate. It stopped. Last year, the deficit was $34 trillion. So in 1 year, it went up $2 trillion. At what point does this country go bankrupt? Is it 38? Is it 40 trillion? The federal spending is out of control, and we the people need to impose fiscal restraints to get back to living within a budget just like we all do. There is a need for term limits. We the people limit the president to 2 terms. We need to impose term limits on members of Congress. Did you know Chuck Grassley, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell have been in the Senate for over 40 years? Nancy Pelosi has been in the House of Representatives for 38 years. Serving in Congress was never meant to be a lifetime job. There was a survey done in 2023 that said 87% of Americans want term limits for Congress. In closing, we're not going to solve this problem at the ballot box. We need a convention of states to bring the states together to discuss these issues without any interference with the federal government. So I respectfully ask for your support in passing Article 5, Convention of States Resolution, HCR 10, and have Idaho become the 20th state to call for the convention. Thank you for your time, and I yield for questions.
Any questions of the testifier? Thank you for coming here to testify today.
Thank you.
Committee, we're going to take a 10-minute break, a comfort break for my committee members and maybe for you. So if you would, let them use their restroom or get their coffee, whatever they need, and don't interrupt them with lobbying. It'd be appreciated. You can do what you want, but that would be appreciated. So we are at ease.
Zoom, but just wow. I don't know what to comment on first, some of the crazy opposition or some of the wonderful testimony from our grassroots. Where would you want to start? Oh, Rita, I can't hear you. Well, Rita, while you get your mic fixed, if you can hear me, I was blown away really at some of the amazing testimony that we heard from our grassroots. I mean, the only thing that came to mind for me was they were respectful, polite, informed, and they had such a positive tone. And I just really commend our grassroots, because hearing our opposition just lie and lie and lie and talk about Article 5 and kind of just really talk so poorly about the founding just really can really upset people, and it didn't bother them at all. They were just down the line, positive tone, and just there to testify in support of HCR 9 and HCR 10. Reed, I don't know if your mic's back up, but what are your thoughts if you are? Oh, it doesn't look like we have Rita back. In between some of the testimony, there was some just crazy opposition. We saw several interest groups come out. And in fact, the first one that came up, the League of Women Voters, I believe is what it was. One of our committee members who's in support of HCR 10 and 9 asked a question. She just completely fell apart. And that was, one, it was delicious to see, but two, it was just great that we were actually getting questions that were going to our opposition and really asking, can you tell the difference between Article 5 and a constitutional convention? What are the differences? So, oh, Rita, I see that you're back on. Do we have audio?
I don't know. Can you hear me? We
I
working?
can hear you.
All right.
So, Rita, I need you by my side. You're the one that's able to really keep going and talk. You're like the Energizer Bunny when it comes to this stuff, not me. But
Oh, well, I
would
guess.
come.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't know. I was just going to back up for a minute, just for anyone who's joining the live stream late, and just let you know, you have been watching a live stream of an Idaho House Committee hearing on just 2 resolutions, our 34 ready legislation, which is the procedural piece that basically puts in the process by which Idaho commissioners would be selected and controlled by the legislature during an Article 5 convention. And then, of course, our Article 5 application itself in Idaho, which is HCR 10. So just those 2 resolutions. And obviously we've been going how long now? And over an hour we've been
Over an
going
hour.
already in this committee, and they're just taking a break. So we're not done yet. I really don't know how many more people are there to testify. I do know Rick Santorum is in the room. And I'm actually glad, Andrew, that they're putting him off until a little bit later. I've been texting with him during the hearing and, talking about how he's going to respond. There's so much. So part of the problem for someone in his position who gets to do rebuttal is narrowing it down, what to even focus on. You've got like crazy tinfoil hat kind of things coming out from some of the opponents. And I heard you mention, the one Representative Alfieri on the committee, who has been a longtime supporter of Convention of States, actually firing back with a question for the League of Women Voters lobbyists, which she was just absolutely unable to answer because, her information is incorrect. So she's not going to be able to answer it. So I loved seeing that. And Andrew, don't you think our supporters are just doing an amazing job?
Yes, that was my comment while you were getting your audio kind of back up. What came to mind was how polite they were, and how positive they are. And this is, despite all of the opposition that they're hearing. I mean, we at Convention of States, when we listen to these hearings, we hear the opposition, and so it's hard not to get upset that they're telling lies and kind of besmirching the founding and the founders, and they got to pull down the entire process of the Constitution being ratified to prove their point. And no one likes to hear that, because we respect the Constitution. And
Yeah.
so, but our grassroots, they were not phased, not one bit. They stayed positive. They stayed on point. They were reasonable. And you know what I noticed? Almost all of them finished right on time. Whereas our
Yes.
opposition, they just kept going and going and going and not being respectful of the chair's time or the committee's time.
Yeah, they have to eventually be cut off because they keep going.
Exactly.
I see we have Catherine Zemanix. I want to get to Catherine. Hey, Catherine, I'm going to come to you with a question in just a minute. But I want to point out too, because this is something that comes up with the opponents every committee hearing. They say, well, Article 5 says nothing about the states controlling the process. So who knows what's going to happen? Congress is going to control, or we don't know who's going to control. Well, there are lots of, processes and terms in the Constitution, trial by jury, writ of habeas corpus, other processes that are named in the Constitution, but don't have all the details spelled out in the Constitution because that's not what the Constitution is for. When a process or, a gathering like a convention was already well known to the founders when they wrote the Constitution and used that phrase, they didn't take up constitutional text to spell it out. Everybody knew how it worked. And that's how it is with a convention of the states. It was a well-known process to the founding fathers. And of course, it was controlled by the states because it was a convention of the states. The states are the ones being represented. So, of course, they choose their commissioners. Of course, they're the ones who control the agenda and control the activities of their commissioners. So, I just wanted to point that out. Catherine, I want to go to you, if I may, and just see, you're the regional director for Idaho. How do you think your team's doing?
I think they're doing a great job, but I wanted to reference something that kind of disturbs me sometimes every time we're in these hearings, and that is who gets the sort of label of an expert, right? It really is interesting to me, the woman who said she's been studying this for 11 years, but she's been only studying the opposition for 11 years. And when you say to people, well, have you read Rob Nadelson's book, or have you read Michael Ferris's, Harvard Law Review? No, I don't need to do that, right? So it's a little frustrating to me, but our folks know this very well and understand it. And I think Rick is going to get up there and he's going to do a great job. I'm hoping he'll get longer than 3 minutes. And then, of course, Representative Redmond will wrap things up. So we should see a vote today. It's a tough committee, but it's a fair committee. And I just am so proud of our team out in Idaho. Very often, as you know, Rita, we don't get a whole lot of time to prepare for this because they plan these committee hearings, just a couple weeks in advance. So I say bravo to the Idaho team for getting this all together and being so prepared.
Absolutely. I am very proud of them. And Catherine, you make a great point about who is considered an expert. What we hear from the opponents are a lot of people getting up there, offering speculation, saying, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. They don't have any actual evidence of what they're saying. And more importantly, they don't deal with the evidence that is out there that demonstrates the contrary. You don't hear any of them explaining where they think constitutional expert and litigator and author and scholar Michael Ferris, where they think he's wrong in his Harvard Law Review article that disproves the Runaway Convention. So, if you want to be taken seriously, if you're going to get up there and say the 1787 convention was a runaway, you need to be able to deal with the serious scholarship that's out there saying the opposite and proving the opposite. And they're not doing that. So, I hope the committee members see through that. And I hope the committee members, are like me and see if you're not dealing with the proof that is out there to the contrary of what you're saying, then you're just not credible and you're certainly not an expert.
For sure.
Okay, so Catherine, do you happen to know from our team on the ground there how many more folks are expected to testify today?
You know, what we decided to do, and this was the advice of our folks, our team out there, we decided that we would limit our testimony because we respect the time of the legislators on the committee. It may seem like there's a whole bunch of opposition out there testifying, but our decision was to just really hone in on the best testimony we had and limit that. So I think we're probably pretty close to wrapping up our testimony, other than Senator Santorum and our sponsor. I'm not sure. We might have one or two more, but it really was a decision based on respecting the time of the legislators on that committee.
Sure.
Yeah, and it really shows, Catherine. Just your team is just, they're doing a phenomenal job. And you know what I noticed is that there's no out-of-staters who are testifying. Those are all people in Idaho, and our opposition does that all the time. They bring in people from all over the country. They zoom in and they talk against our resolution, but we don't do that. And you know what I also noticed is that our team it's like a well-oiled machine when it comes to testimony.
Looks like we're back.
Yeah. Oh, we're back. All right. So we'll have you back in a few minutes, Catherine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
First up is Howard Reinerson. It's supposed to be virtual. Do it's virtual. I don't know why it's not coming up. Here we go. Oh. Oh. We lost him. We have Ryan Thompson. Welcome, Ryan. Introduce yourself. Tell us what you know.
Hello, I'm Ryan Thompson. I'm from Meridian.
Mic's not on. Is it switched? On the base?
No. There you go. Okay. Thank you. I'm Ryan Thompson. I'm from Meridian, and I'm here. I'm the executive director for the state party down the road here, and I wanted to come and remind everyone. So the RNC, the Republican National Committee, in 2012, before their summer meeting, they had passed a resolution that's still in effect for the Republican National Committee, and it was a resolution against Article 5. So I wanted to read just a little bit that's in here, just to remind everyone what the Republican National Committee has said. So the resolved was the most important part that wanted to highlight. It says, resolved that the Republican National Committee strongly opposes the convening of a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States for the reason that the risk of loss far exceeds the possibility of gain from such an uncontrolled and uncontrollable proceeding. Just want to reiterate that this is still in effect. It has not been rescinded since it was passed in 2012 by the Republican National Committee. I stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of the presenter? Representative Schertz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for coming over. Yeah, has Idaho passed anything on this? Or okay.
No.
Was that a no?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry.
See no further questions. Thank you for your time and testimony.
Thank you.
Next up is Sheila Ford, followed by Larry Craig. And we are not going to get to everyone, so I'm going to do my best to bring people up in the next 15 minutes. Go ahead when you're ready.
My name is Sheila Ford, Caldwell, Idaho,
Thank you for allowing me to speak, Chairman Skog and the members of the committee. Many things that I was going to say have already been said, so I will just say that Article 5 does not establish rules for the convention, and Congress might claim that power, which Article 5 does not deny to them. And Article 5 says that Congress will call a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. It does not confine it to one topic or limit the number of potential topics. One of the topics that is in the bill that you're considering says limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Well, Article 1, Section 8 does that, and they're ignoring it. And the convention, having concluded, will not cause Congress, which has been ignoring its limits defined in Article 1, Section 8, to magically begin to honor those limits. And are there any questions?
All right. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Larry Craig. Is Larry Craig here? Welcome, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, first and foremost, let me thank you all for your service and your willingness to dive into an issue that is, by the testimony today and by past history of the issue, contentious, but critically and necessarily very important. Article 5 does something for state legislators that few recognize. It gives you the power to control the federal government's spending or other areas of the federal government as you may choose to place in a concurrent resolution. It's a phenomenally unique power. I had the privilege of serving here in the Senate from 1974 on. And during that time, a fellow by the name of Dave Little, Governor Little's father, was my seatmate in the Senate. He elbowed me one day and said, "Hey, Craig, let's go over to the Oahe Hotel and listen to Governor Reagan. He's coming through town and he may well become our next president, or at least it's being talked about." We went, I listened, and Governor Reagan at that time said something I'd never thought about and frankly didn't know about. He talked about Article 5 and the importance of putting a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. Well, I came home and studied. And in 1979, the Idaho legislature did exactly what you're considering doing today. I took that issue. I ran with it to the US Congress, served there, helped form groups. I traveled with the president and others at the time advocating this, and we almost got there. It was 1994, and my colleague, Rick Santorum, was in the House, ready to come over to the Senate. It was an issue called Contract with America, and we got Newt Gingrich to put it in. And it passed the 2/3 vote in the House. It went to the Senate. I helped carry the debate there. We lost by 1 vote. The reason I talk to you about this is that there will probably never be a convention. There are 33 amendments sent out by the US Congress for states to consider and ratify. Only 27 were. So states take that job very seriously. We've heard today about a runaway convention. Listen, we all know that conventions only do one thing. They propose amendments to the Constitution. It's 3/4 of the states of our nation that ratify. What a convention would do if it were to happen, and I don't believe it will, because I believe Congress will issue an amendment long before a convention ever gets there. That's what our goal was in the 90s. That's what President Reagan's goal was in the 80s and the 90s. In fact, he said so and said it very clearly. Let us push the Congress to the point of offering an amendment to come forward. And that's what they did. That's what we're asking you to do now, is take on your job, your constitutional responsibility, and send to the Congress of the United States
I have to wrap up, Senator.
House Concurrent Resolution 10.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I remember you talking about this in 1993 at the Nampa Lions Club. You are consistent.
Well, and the reason I'm consistent, Mr. Chairman, is quite simple. When we debated it in 1979, the federal debt was 600 billion. When we were debating it in Congress in 1994, the federal deficit was 4.2 trillion. Now that's about 60% of the GDP. We know what it is today. Everybody's talking about it. It's 36 trillion, and that's 123% of the gross domestic product of this country. So yes, it's worth talking about and fixating on just a little bit.
All right. I have a question for you from Representative Ehart. Oh, Representative Hill. Excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Craig, it's an
Representative
honor
Hill.
to have you here. We've all known about you and followed you for many, many years. You somewhat answered one of my questions by detailing the history of our deficits. It makes you wonder why the framers didn't do anything about that when they adopted the Constitution initially, but they didn't. They didn't do that.
That's correct.
But you also said something that I just want to reemphasize. Is there any way, if a convention is held, that any amendment to the Constitution as proposed can be adopted without 3/4 of the states approving it?
No.
Senator, through the chair.
The answer is no.
Thank you.
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for coming.
Vice Chair.
You talked about perhaps one of the goals of this Article 5 convention is to force action by the federal government, for action by the Congress. Is there an example where that's actually happened?
Well, as has been said, since the original Constitutional Convention, there has been no other. There have been thousands of amendments proposed. There have been a variety of conventions proposed. None of them came to pass. But the Congress has sent forth 33 amendments to states for ratification that were in part a product of pressure from the states. The idea of of Amendment 17, the popular election of senators. Well, senators were once appointed by state legislatures, and it became at least obvious to the public that they felt the senators appointed were products of smoke-filled rooms, that they ought to be openly elected by the people of the country. That amendment, that pressure built, finally Congress, and of course senators didn't want to do that, sent forth an amendment for ratification. So yes, it has happened, but no convention has been convened.
Representative Heather Scott.
Thank you, Chairman Bruce Scott. Senator Craig, I'm curious, you talked about power in the states, and I don't see that in the language of the actual amendment. So can you explain what you're talking about, taking back power in the states?
Article 5 is relatively short, and it speaks of two methods by which to amend the Constitution. And the one of them is the one we're debating today, the process of a concurrent resolution, or the state legislatures approaching that for a constitutional convention purpose. And as I say, in all instances where that pressure has built, the Congress has issued an amendment of the topic at hand for states to consider for ratification. What our founding fathers wanted to do, and did it very successfully, and we see it over the history of our country, they wanted to make it very difficult to change the Constitution, but they recognized the potential of a federal government getting out of control. Now remember, we're a republic. We're not a democracy. And so our states at that time were all powerful in the formation of our central government. And they wanted to make sure that the states retained some of that power as to the creation of the balance for the change of the Constitution when and if necessary. Some say, well, it's a sacred document crafted never to be touched. Well, it's been touched a lot. It couldn't even
arrive at first ratification until 10 amendments were proposed. And since that time, now we're up to 27. So you see, it has changed. It is dynamic. It can be allowed to be when necessary and when a majority of our states, a super majority, agree that that ought to be the case.
And a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Craig. So you've been around a long time, it sounds like. So
Well, I
have a
don't like to be
question.
reminded of that,
If you-
but yes.
Senator, to keep order, speak through the chair. If you would.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Craig. So my question is, you've probably watched over the last month, as we all have, the new administration rooting out corruption in our country. And I think there's going to be some huge changes coming. Does it make you nervous at all, the timing of this now in where we are? I'd say the ship is turning and progress is happening every second, it seems like. And so I'm just curious if you see any conflict with the timing of this and what we have happening at the national level with corruption being exposed and, using just, I guess
Sure.
you could touch on that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Scott, the answer quite simply is no. I think the target of DOGE is to gain somewhere near a couple of $1 trillion of reduction in expenditure. And of course, we're hearing about corruption in aid, USAID, and other places. It isn't just corruption. There is a potentially significant corruption in a variety of programs where spending has become so great that nobody can effectively monitor it. Medicare, Medicaid is an example, and yet they're pretty sacred. They're viewed as quite valuable. It's possible that they can gain their $2 trillion or $1.5 trillion. The last budget passed, the concurrent resolution passed by this Congress, had a $2 trillion deficit built into it. If you voted for it, you were voting for a $2 trillion deficit. In other words, to add $2 trillion to the national budget. Now, as a legislator, if you came to town knowing you were going to vote for a budget that had hundreds of millions of dollars of deficit in it, would you do that? Well, you couldn't do it here because you have to at least attempt, based on projected revenue, to balance the budget. It's your call. It's your requirement to serve. So no, I don't see a conflict here at all because it's already been said in testimony. Donald Trump may come and go, but that legislature will be there. And the habit of spending as we now know it is significant.
All right, Representative Schertz, this is the last question for the senator because we want to get a few more people out before we're done.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. Senator, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Can you just talk to me about this idea of a runaway convention? I've had so many constituents that I represent have brought this issue to me, and I know they're your people too, because you used to represent the same area that I represent now. Is that a worry for you? And if so, why not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schertz, no. And it's quite simply and very loudly, no. There are 6 major safety steps in the formalization, the convening, and the ratification process that would produce a convention and the delegates and any proposed amendment that might come from it. As I said earlier, conventions can only propose. They cannot ratify an amendment. That's your responsibility. If a convention were to bring forth 2 or 3 amendments and send them out, they would come here. The Congress will first instruct and shape the convention. You have the privilege through Resolution 9, concurrent Resolution 9, of shaping the method by which you send the commissioners or the delegates to the convention. And that can be very clear and very direct, and you can monitor that. In fact, I think it's Wyoming said that it's a felony to violate the charge and the responsibility that you would be given as a delegate. Remember, this is a legislative process. It's not a governor. It's not a president. It's the Congress and state legislators that have the right and responsibility under the Constitution to change the Constitution. So I don't worry about it, because the last and most valuable part is the ratification. Can you imagine a national debate where every state legislature dug into a federal budget and looked at it and decided that they ought to ratify and force a balance? I mean, that's a phenomenally valuable debate for our nation to go through, as it might be term limits or any of those other issues that would come up. I personally don't favor a convention. I don't think one's necessary, because I think we can force the Congress to do what we attempted to do and nearly did in 1994. But at the same time, I don't fear it. From the time Ronald Reagan left office until we took away our call to convention, there were a variety of organizations in the nation that worked at bringing down those calls, because we were up to 32 and ready for the 33rd state. In fact, it was Montana that we believed might come in at that time, which would have got us to the 34 necessary to tip it over and to cause the Congress to move. But we were able to cause that to happen prior to that. So no, I do not fear it. I frankly think it is a smokescreen, in my blunt opinion, for the simple reason, Mr. Chairman, we return to you and we turn to the legislature to say, debate it, look at it, and decide whether you want this in your Constitution or you don't. That's a phenomenally valuable safety check.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, thank you.
Senator Santorum, followed by Julianne Young. When you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Skog, Vice Chairman Alfieri, and the committee. What I'd like to do is just give you a little practical experience. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I have served, not as long as Larry did, but I served in Washington for a long time. And I can tell you, Washington is not going to fix itself. All of the people who've talked about different things that could happen, that could change things. And I know Representative Scott points out that Donald Trump and Doge are doing a lot of things. A lot of them will be done. A lot of them won't be done. And 4 years from now, all those things could be wiped out, just like Donald Trump has wiped out everything Joe Biden has put in place. The bottom line is, the way I like to put it is, the house is on fire. Does anybody think that this country is not headed to a financial collapse? Does anybody not believe that? Raise your hand if you don't think, if you don't think we're headed to a financial collapse, raise your hand. We are. The house is on fire. You can sit here and say, well, maybe it'd be risky. What's risky about putting a house that's on fire out? You may be across the street looking at the house and you say, well, it's dangerous to cross the street. There are no cars on the street that I see. But if my house is on fire, I'm going to cross the street. The reality is, this country needs what the founders put you folks there to do: check the power of Washington, in the case of the federal government. That's what you're there to do. And they put two checks in there. One, you folks used to appoint United States senators. You gave that power up in 1912. And as a result, from 1912, by the way, the only debt of the federal government in 1912 was $1.50 from the Spanish-American War. And ever since then, it has exploded. Why? Because you took the check away. Senators that you appointed didn't let power grow in Washington, D.C., because you were holding their feet to the fire. That changed, and Washington changed. People say people are not, they're not living up to the Constitution as it is. That's just not true. Yeah, they're not living up to this Constitution, but that isn't the Constitution we live under. You want the Constitution we live under? Order one from the General Printing Office. It's 2,600 pages. You say, well, that's not the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the Constitution. That's the reality. People don't want to live in reality. Let me tell you about reality. The reality, those are amendments to the Constitution plus Supreme Court cases that have exploded the power of the federal government. People say, don't touch the Constitution. The Constitution has been touched and trampled, not ignored. President Trump is doing things. He's going to get a constitutional test as to whether the court's going to say you can do that or not. It happens all the time. Congress passes law. They're subject to constitutional scrutiny. But the court is the one who looks at the amendments, looks at the Constitution itself, and then determines whether it is a legitimate exercise of power. You put new amendments in, you change that dynamic. I'm here. I live outside of Washington. If I wanted to, I could spend, I comment on television. I've run for president. I've been a senator. If I thought that I could fix the problem in Washington, I wouldn't be in Boise. Not that I don't love Boise. I love Boise, but I wouldn't be here. The only reason I'm here is because you are the only ones that can fix this problem. And the founders believed in you, and so do I.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions of the senator? Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Chairman Skog. Senator Santorum, just one quick question. What if we go through this whole process and we get all the states that we need to start an Article 5 convention and nothing happens?
I hate to say that, but that's probably
Through the
the most
chairman.
likely result.
Senator.
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
gotta
I'm
slow
sorry.
down.
Sorry, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Yes,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, I thank you for the question, but as I said, I think it's the most likely result. Why? Because getting 38 states to ratify anything, it's the hardest thing to do in this country. Just, there's no other bar as high as amending the Constitution. No state government, no local, no government anywhere has that bar. Do you look at the 27 amendments that passed? 10 were at the founding. So let's look at the 17 that passed since the founding. All of them were 80+% issues. Why? Because you need 75% of the states. You're not going to have anything that's controversial, left or right, have any chance. And if you're going to a convention, you are the folks who are going to be picked. It'll be state legislators. If you're going there, are you going to propose amendments that have no chance of passing? Of course you're not. You're there to be constructive. You have the responsibility to use, the first time in our country's history, to use the power that the founders gave you. These founders who some people call tyrants, I don't. I think they were amazing. And I think, by the way, they did follow their commissions. For the first time, are you going to go rogue? Of course not. This is a sacred trust. It's a sacred trust that your state is giving you, and you're going to go there just like, I can't even imagine. It would be the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And you would go there to do what? You would go there to try to help the country. The fact that people sit around and say, oh, these people can't be trusted with anything. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't trust institutions in our country, we are doomed. If you aren't willing to trust yourselves, we're doomed. I trust you.
Any questions? Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Santorum, welcome.
Thank you.
You absolutely give passionate testimony. Let me ask something that I think is in your wheelhouse, given your past, and I think you were very vocal about it, and it's a concern that some of us have, and it's something I'll probably address. I think we'd all agree our founders were pretty spiritual men. I think you're a spiritual man. There's a concern about the spirituality. I'm going to give you a chance, if you would, to address that. I don't think that's a concern where we'd be.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Ehart, excuse me. If you read, and I have, many of the biographies of the founders, they were spiritual men, but they were sinners. They were every bit the sinner as anybody in this room. Everybody talks about them as they're sort of, marble statues. These are broken men in many respects. Hamilton was shot in a duel. I mean, these are not saints. They were good men who, I always talk about the greatest generation. Why were they the greatest generation? Do you think people in the greatest generation had better values and morals than the generation before them or after them? I would say no, generally speaking. Why were they great? Because they met the challenge of their day. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Meet the challenge of your day. I don't think anybody questions that what's going on in Washington. Look at all the clamor for just the few. Senator Craig is right. I mean, they're talking about minor changes in spending here, and the place is going crazy. Meet the challenge of your day. Restore checks and balances to the federal government. Restore it. And Do I believe that people who will go to that convention may not be as spiritual as folks before? Yes, but here's one of the brilliant things the founders did, Representative, and that is they put a provision in there where actually we want the delegates, you who are going to be appointed from the states, the founders wanted you to be self-interested. They actually wanted you to grab power. So I would just say that the folks who are going to be appointed there, the more power they grab back to the states, in other words, the more they enhance their own power, I'm all for it. So in a sense, they set it up to understand the frailties of men and women and actually are exploiting them to try to limit the power of the federal government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Senator.
much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity.
Julianne Young. And I'm having trouble with my timer on the last couple people, so I'm going to have Nancy time and she'll waive that yes shortly before the 3 minutes are up.
Okay, before I start, Mr. Chairman, can I make sure that the committee sees these two items that are in your folders?
Yes, I think they're in the folders. Go ahead and get those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Julianne Young. I'm for Blackfoot and I represent myself. I fell hopelessly in love with the United States Constitution years ago, and I've never gotten over it. Today, you've heard a lot of appeals to authority. I want you to notice from the handout that's in your folder there are authorities on both sides of this issue. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the only authority that matters is Article 5 of the Constitution itself. And I suspect that no one in favor of a convention has actually gone over Article 5 with you, nor have they shared with you the congressional research reports that were mentioned earlier, nor have they shared with you the legislation, dozens of pieces of legislation that have been introduced in Congress outlining how a convention would happen, because they know that if you looked at those original sources, you would have questions. If you read Article 5 closely, you would notice that it actually empowers Congress. Congress is the subject of Article 5, empowered to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution or to call a convention to propose amendments. Under the Constitution, Congress has all powers necessary and proper to call that convention, including defining the delegates, how they will be chosen, and how their representation will be apportioned. There is no guarantee, despite all that you've been told today, that state legislatures will have any say in who those delegates are. And the historic trajectory of congressional proposals, of which there have been dozens, is to propose proportional representation, not one state, one vote guaranteed, as you are told. Congressional powers include the responsibility to fund the convention according to them. If power follows money, as we frequently say, that should tell us everything that we need to know. Under Article 5, Congress might send proposed amendments to state legislatures for ratification, or they may choose ratification by conventions in states, which conventions must necessarily be organized as determined by Congress. While Congress is the primary subject empowered throughout Article 5, the states get two brief nods. Our applications trigger the calling of the convention, hardly a power position. And we might get to ratify amendments if Congress chooses to. You are being told today that you can provide delegate instructions. Idaho has no legal authority to instruct or even select delegates, not under the US Constitution and not under the Idaho Constitution. To pretend to this authority is disingenuous on our part. The actual delegates may owe their positions to Congress or to the voters in a special election and not to state legislatures. The Constitution authorizes the convention to propose amendments. Under the Supremacy Clause, any state law which contradicts the Constitution is void. Ultimately, state law cannot control delegates to a convention because a convention is the highest authority in our republic. It emanates directly from the people. And if delegates chose to meet in secret as they did in 1787, we wouldn't even know what they were doing. If someone came to this committee with a financial proposal making promises that they had no authority to make or to
Young, you'll have to
enforce,
wrap up now.
and which directly contradicted the plain terms of the contract, I would expect you to vote no. Our Constitution is infinitely more valuable than a few taxpayer dollars.
Are there questions of the testifier? Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Young, it's good to have you back. Your presence has been missed. We've spoken a little bit about this. Would you mind addressing, can an amendment be adopted without ratification by the states?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ehart. It can. Article 5 is plain. Congress may choose between two methods of ratification. There is no guarantee that state legislatures will ratify whatever comes out. I provided you with a handout with the plain language of Article 5, which you can see for yourself. And I think it's also instructive to notice when you read the minutes of the Constitutional Convention, they chose to have the people of the states vote to ratify our first Constitution rather than returning it to state legislatures. There's precedent for this. There's only one time in the history of our nation where an amendment has been ratified by conventions and state legislatures, and that was the repeal of prohibition. Congress selected ratification by conventions in the states because they needed a vote or two from the Western states, which were some of the driest, most anti-liquor states in the country. And so they selected ratification by conventions, and the repeal of prohibition was ultimately repealed upon the final vote of the state of Utah, which was one of the driest, most anti-liquor states in the country, and that was a unanimous vote on the part of the convention. We are being told today that we will have a primary role because it makes us feel good, but we do not play a prominent role in Article 5. The things that you are being told cannot be guaranteed, and they cannot be found in the plain text of Article 5. If you have any doubts or any questions about this, I urge you to vote no on these pieces of legislation. Thank you.
Any questions? Representative Young, I have one question. We have HCR 9 and HCR 10, and HCR 9, should that pass, it has pretty tight restrictions, it reads. Doesn't that make you a little more comfortable if HCR 10 passes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great question. I was talking probably too fast when I gave my testimony. But one of the things that I think is important is that if Congress calls this convention, they must say who the eligible delegates will be. There's been discussion about this, and if you look at the congressional research reports and other things, you'll see that there's a possibility that the governors select delegates. There's a possibility that they could be judges. There's also a possibility, there's been discussion about whether members of Congress themselves could serve as delegates. And the Bar Association reached the conclusion that that was a possibility because we had members of the Congress under the Articles of Confederation who served as delegates in the first Constitutional Convention. We don't know how those delegates will be selected. What we do know is that Congress is authorized under Article 5 to call the convention, and they are the only ones that could possibly have the authority to say how that will happen. With that, we cannot guarantee that we will have any role or that this legislation, which is before us, will be effectual in any way.
Representative Rubel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Young. I was wondering if you could flesh out a little bit, because I know I've heard for many years that this would be rock solid and enforceable. What are concerns around that whatever we pass in order to control delegates, if there was to be such a convention, would be superseded by federal law or would otherwise be unenforceable, whatever constraints we sought to put on those delegates?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Rubel. The only authority I see in the law is the statement in Article 5 that Congress calls the convention. That tells me that Congress decides who selects the delegates and how that process works. So should Congress choose not to have state legislatures select the delegates, we'll have absolutely no say in it. It's like Idaho writing a statute to tell Arizona how they're going to run their education system. It's not in our wheelhouse. It's not our delegated power. We have a government of written separated powers for a reason. And if it's outside of our jurisdiction, we have no say.
Representative Hill.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Young, nice to meet you for the first time. My brother speaks highly of you. Did I understand you to say that if Congress takes the step of proposing an amendment, it doesn't require three-fourths ratification by 3/4 of the states? Did you say that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Hill. What I said is, if you look at the plain language of Article 5, and I did provide it for you on that handout at the top, Congress may choose one or the other mode of ratification, and the two modes are listed in Article 5. The first is ratification by 3/4 of the states. The second option is ratification by conventions in 3/4 of the states, as Congress may choose one method or the other.
But it requires 3/4 of the states to approve an amendment no matter what. I've got the language in front of me. I'm a lawyer, maybe not the best one in this room, but I am a lawyer. And first of all, when you say Congress can do it, let's be clear. It says the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses deem it necessary, that's 2/3 of the House and the Senate, shall propose amendments to the Constitution or, not and, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention. So those are the two paths, but no matter what, at the end of the day, no amendment to the Constitution gets made without ratification by 3/4 of the states. I think that's 38. I don't see it read any other way. That's a question. Put a question mark at the end of that.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Hill. I understand your question. And the answer is, my answer was not that 3/4 of the states would not have to ratify it, but simply that there are two options. And we are assuming in all of our conversation here that it's 3/4 of the state legislatures. It's not necessarily 3/4 of the state legislatures. It may also be conventions in 3/4 of the states. And those conventions must necessarily be whatever Congress says an authorized convention can be, which is what happened when we had the repeal of prohibition.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood. I'm sorry. Never mind.
All right. Seeing no further questions. Thank you, Representative Young. Last to testify, and I apologize deeply to my friends who are going to harangue me, Ryan, after this because I didn't get you called. We can't get everyone. So last is Constantine Curard, and I may have butchered your last name. I apologize.
Quite well, thank you.
Introduce yourself and tell us what you know.
Yes, please. It's English up here briefly. It's thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. It's Constantine Curard. I'm here on behalf of U.S. Term Limits. I'm the Western Regional Director and basically standing here on behalf of the more than 1.5 million Idahoans who support term limits on Congress. I had prepared remarks, and then after that last speaker, I kind of tossed them and said, "Okay, you guys have heard enough about this. I just want to make sure we have some clarity before you guys proceed to any votes." Plus, I would point out that nobody that testified today actually spoke against a balanced budget amendment or against term limits for Congress. This entire room seems unanimous that we should have both. And for those of you who understand the process, this is the only way to get either of them. This is the only way to get both of them. Congress will likely propose these amendments, but not until the states make them, because it's not in Congress's interests to put limits on themselves or how they spend money. But when the states apply the pressure, Congress will do what Congress has always done, and that is bend the knee to the states when forced to. And so this is the process. It is, I always liken it to people who say, well, I believe in a long, healthy life. I'm just fundamentally opposed to diet and exercise. The bad news is there's only one way to get there. And since we all agree on the goal, we really do need to find consensus on how quickly we can take the only path that applies. Just quickly, kind of, and I'm kind of doing this without the notes now. The states are supreme in this process. Congress's role is minimal. Yes, please read Article 5 because Congress's role is extremely limited. If the states make a call, Congress's role is largely ministerial, and that is to set the time, date, and place on the call, include the subject matter, which is they say, okay, I've got 34 calls here for whatever, a balanced budget amendment, term limits, a convention of states, whatever it is. So you all are to send your delegations to Independence Hall in Philadelphia at noon on July 4th for the purpose of debating these amendments. And Congress is done for now. Now the process goes back to the states. Who are you? You're supreme. You are the people. You set the delegates. You decide how they are sent. You put whatever limitations you wish to on them. This is how it has always been done. It's not a question of, well, we don't know because of course we had. There were numerous conventions, and there's never been any question that it's one state, one vote, how the delegates are selected, who gets to pick the delegates. The states rule, Idaho decides for Idaho. You decide how many delegates you send. I recommend an odd number because they're going to be voting on your state's position, and if you send 6, you don't want a 3-3 tie. But those are all questions that the states get to decide. It's not until the convention has completed its work and sent back to Congress whatever work product you've generated that Congress is once again in the process. And even then, it is only to decide the method of ratification, which, as Representative Hill, the shadow representative, so adequately, it is still 3/4 of the states that must ratify. Congress has always instructed the legislatures to ratify amendments, except for the repeal of prohibition, because there was largely a fear that there were some states where folks who wanted to kind of keep the U.S. dry were so strong in the state houses, they didn't think they'd be able to get it through, and so they went to the state. But the state conventions are operated by the legislatures. You determine how your state convention operates. Again, this is not something where Congress gets to impose. Congress has an extremely limited role here because the founders, when they wrote Article 5, said Congress proposes and the states ratify. And before they left, they said, but what if Congress is the problem? Congress will never rein itself in. So the states were given the power to propose as well. So you guys are in charge. You have the power. Please do read Article 5. I'll stand for any questions because there was a lot of smoke. So we'll try to clear what we can.
My apologies. I forgot to watch the clock. I don't know if you went 5 minutes over or 10 seconds, but
10 seconds, sir.
All right. Representative Schertz. Thank you for your vote. Representative Schertz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Curard, appreciate you coming and testifying for us. I had a question about the 1787 convention that we heard was a runaway convention. Do you have much historical account of what actually took place?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question because there's usually, when you have 2 minutes to tell a story and someone has 2 minutes to say 10 alarmist things, you don't get a chance to respond to all of them properly. 1787, again, was, the idea is that, well, they were sent for one purpose and they did another purpose. And historically, that's not accurate. In 1786, I believe, the Annapolis Convention recommended basically a fresh constitution. Of the 13 states, 7 immediately commissioned delegates for the purpose of basically a new document that would be sufficient to the needs of this new nation. Congress, after those 7 states, decided to opine and sent a letter to the states recommending that the convention be limited in scope. And so people will say, well, it was supposed to be a limited convention and they ignored that. No, they ignored Congress because Congress has no role in these. These are state-run processes. So after Congress, the original actually recommendation from Congress was supposed to be fairly broad. The delegation from New York, a congressman specifically, an anti-federalist, objected to that and said, no, it should be restricted. So Congress kind of said, well, would you mind restricting it? Even the letter from Congress to the states indicated that it was an opinion letter. It was a request. They had no authority in the matter. Of the 6 states that were left, 3 also gave their delegates full. Georgia, I've got the Georgia one. Their delegates were allowed to, and all such alterations and further provisions as may be necessary to render the federal constitution adequate to the exigencies of the union. Like, do whatever you have to do. That was the kind of direction that most of them received. One of them, God, I think it was Delaware, had limited. 2 of them basically were, I'm sorry, 1 state did not show, 2 had limited. There were 55 delegates at that convention. 48 of the 55 had the authority to basically rewrite the whole thing. Of the 7 who did not, 1 went home for a sick wife. 3 chose not to sign because they were following their instructions. 3 of them, 2, I think 2 maybe from New York, or Hamilton, I think was a New Yorker who did it in his personal capacity, which is probably a loophole that didn't exist. So of the 55, technically 3 were operating outside their instructions. 52 of them were following their instructions. And that is not a runaway by any historical measure.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Curard. My question is, we talk about the spending problem in the federal government, and we say we don't have any power to stop that, but we do have the 10th Amendment that all of our states seem to ignore, that the federal government's outside of its boundaries or delegated powers in education and healthcare and all that, because we accept this federal money. And so if we can't get together on that fact alone, that the federal government is outside of its delegated authority, what makes you think that we're going to get our act together to rein in spending?
Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, Representative Scott, the balanced budget amendment pushes already at 27 states. So you're almost done. So that one alone tells you that legislatures around this country are very serious. I'd also suggest that when you're adding $1 trillion every 170 days, the problem gets more and more urgent all the time. We're over $1 trillion in interest-only payments. And that's because our interest rates are very, very low. This year, the federal government's going to refinance 1/4 of our debt. We're going out and refinancing $9 trillion this calendar year. So the blended interest rate on what we pay, you're going to come back in 4 or 5 years, you'll be paying upwards of $2 trillion a year. So I believe the states are finding their voice in that matter. But it is also a question of, in essence, putting up guardrails against temptation. If there's ice cream in the freezer, I'm going to eat it. But if I could make a deal with my wife not to buy ice cream, that kind of protects me. So if you place the guardrails around Congress and say you have to be responsible, that obviously will carry down to the states.
Quick follow-up.
One follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Curard. So I still don't, like right now, the states are ignoring the federal constitution. It's not the federal government. They're getting away with what they can because we're ignoring the states by accepting that federal money for things that are outside the boundaries of the federal government. So back to my original question, I still just don't understand how you think that we're going to come together as states that have already been ignoring, all these states have been ignoring the federal government, and now all of a sudden we're going to get on the same page, or ignoring the Constitution, and now we're all going to get on the same page and say we want you to follow it, even though we're the ones violating it by accepting the money?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Scott, I agree. And I would love for states to kind of get their act together on a whole host of issues where I would love for them to be stronger and remember their constitutional authority and their role. And there's nullification. There's all sorts of things that states could be doing, including saying no, which is very, very difficult. But I don't know that the state's failure to do those things means we should decide in advance to also fail on this just because we're failing. No, we have the opportunity here to do something that is very necessary, and there's a very limited time to do it. And so to the degree that you recognize where states are tempted to do the things that they should not be doing, and you have the ability to remove the temptation, almost as a parent to a child, I would implore you to please remove the temptation, recognizing that a child will behave like a child. And perhaps a state government that's offered phenomenal sums of money for, in exchange for authority it should not be giving up, will be tempted in a way that we understand it'll be tempted, and so let's remove the temptation. But that's philosophical. The good news is that the process is there. The founders gave this to you specifically, so if Congress was out of control, you, the states, could stop them. And this is a problem that Congress will not resolve on its own, regardless of the administration, regardless of the efforts. It's a runaway. And the inflationary pressures on the interest rates, which drive up the interest payments on the debt, which drives the deficit, which forces you to print money, which drives the inflationary pressures. You are now on this part of the curve, and time is running out.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I want you to know your food analogies were highly too personal to me.
Appreciate it.
That concludes our testimony. Representative Redmond, come forward when you're ready. I want the committee and audience to know that we had a number of people signed up. There were a handful we didn't get to, but there were 10 of each side of the issue that testified. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I also want to thank everyone that testified on both sides of the issue. I think it was a fascinating debate, obviously a very passionate subject. I think if we polled all the folks that testified, we gave them 100 different issues, we'd probably agree on 95 of them. On this one, where there's definitely some opposition, but I think we all agree on the problem. We probably disagree on how to solve that problem. For context, each 3 calls we have in here, the balanced budget amendment, currently there's 27 states with that. Term limits 9, and convention of states, there's 19. I have to agree with Senator Craig in that I think as we get more momentum towards this issue, I do believe that Congress will act, because I don't think they want to have a convention called. You know, our founders intended for Article 5 in the Constitution. They put it in there, and I believe that it was inspired by God. I believe they gave us these tools, and as Senator Santorum said, the house is on fire. We need to act. Good committee. I ask that you use our authority as sovereign states and send HCR 9 and 10 to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Thank you, Representative. Are there questions of the presenter? Representative Alfieri?
For a motion, sir.
Okay, motion is always in order.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we send HCR 9 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Any discussion on the motion? Representative Rubel,
For a substitute motion, Mr. Chairman?
go ahead.
I moved that, sorry, was it just the one bill?
Yes.
HJR. I would bring a motion that we instead hold it in committee.
So there is a substitute motion to hold HCR 9 in committee, correct? All right. Further discussion, Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just addressing 9. Little frustrated with 9, purporting to already come up with the plan beforehand that we would have to follow if the Article 5 passes. I think it's putting the cart before the horse. And I also am discouraged by some of the language in there, some limitations. I probably should have asked it was my fault. I should have asked the good representative who it was that who had written this, from where did it originate. But just on 9 alone, which you know, Mr. Chairman, I originally wanted to reverse the order, go directly to 10, because if 10 didn't pass, then 9 wouldn't matter. If 10 did pass, then I would like to have a say in 9. So I myself, I guess I'll vote to hold it, but I'm happy just on 9 to vote against it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing no red lights, properly before the committee.
Roll call.
Yes, roll call vote will be taken. Good call. On both of these, without any further request, it will be roll call votes. Representative Garner.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just knew that we needed our.
Oh, Attaché Nancy appreciates you very much. All right, so properly before the committee is HCR number 9 to be held in committee. So a yes vote means that you hold 9 in committee. A no vote means it moves forward to the next motion.
Chairman Skog,
No.
Vice Chair Alfieri,
No.
Representative Scott,
Yes.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Representative Erickson,
No.
Representative Garner,
No.
Representative Handy,
No.
Representative Hawkins,
Yes.
Representative Hill.
No.
Representative Hostetler,
Yes.
Representative Pohanka,
No. No.
Representative Schurtz,
No.
Representative Gannon,
Yes.
Representative Matthias,
No.
Representative Rubel,
Yes.
Motion fails 9-6. Now we'll proceed to the original motion, which is to send HCR 9 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Roll call.
Chairman Skog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Alfieri,
Yes.
Representative Scott,
No.
Representative Ehart,
No.
Representative Erickson,
Yes.
Representative Garner,
Yes.
Representative Handy,
Yes.
Representative Hawkins,
No.
Representative Hill,
Yes.
Representative Hostetler,
No.
Representative Pohanka,
Yes.
Representative Schurtz,
Yes.
Representative Gannon, Representative Matthias, Representative Rubel,
Motion carries 8-7. Further discussion, Representative Alfieri.
Mr. Chairman, I move to send HCR 10 to the floor with the due pass recommendation.
Discussion on the motion. Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll go first. And I'm going to probably share a few more thoughts than I originally would. I hope my colleagues would listen to this. But the first thought that I'd like to share is, as we all know, our document's sacred. The Constitution is sacred. Maybe I will file to receive those 2,000 pages, but right now, the people of the United States look to this. Couple of things I can guarantee you. If we hold a convention, the sacredness of the original Constitution will no longer be as sacred as it is right now. I promise you that will be true. We will look to another convention for words and for the future. The other thing I'll promise you, and I know I can make this promise, if we have a convention, it will be tied up in the courts. My prediction is if we have a convention, there will be of necessity a second convention probably held within 2 years to fix the problems that we saw in the first convention. And yet there'll be words. Everything will be words. We're not marching there with an army. They will be words. We have words in this document. These are important words. They're sacred words. And I do not believe that we'll come up with words that are any more sacred than those words. Another thing that I think, a lot of important points, but important points that are to me and that I've shared with some of you, and I think that you agree. At the time of our founders, well, actually, let me go here. Some of you know I go to Wall Builders, okay? David Barton runs Wall Builders. Glenn Beck goes there. David Barton has had at Wall Builders George Barna for the last couple of years. George Barna is a pollster, a major pollster. And one of the things he shared with us that I found fascinating, I said, surely that cannot be true. George Barna has said that in polling throughout the United States, that there are only 6% of the United States, or the people, when I say United States, the people in America have a biblical worldview. Now let that sink in. Only 6%, he said that twice, have a biblical worldview. When our founders got together, they all had a biblical worldview, some of it differing in different places, but they had a biblical worldview. And that biblical worldview was one of the things that really drew them close together and helped them with, if you might say, a set principles on which to move forward. And that biblical worldview, those men, I believe that that movement at the time, of course, we're all sinners. I believe that we all believe that, but that biblical worldview, the Bible, They studied the Bible, you know, Israel, what the people in Israel, that was a lot of what they did as they studied so many different governments, but that biblical worldview helped them. This was a spiritual movement. I believe that with all my heart. Doesn't matter whether we disagree, you can read their writings. It was very much a spiritual movement. And as I look at what's happening today, and Glenn Beck is an actual friend of mine, and I would like to read some of Glenn Beck's words that he said in September of 22. People said that Glenn changed his mind back. He did not. Glenn said, I've been a supporter of the Article 5 Convention of States. I have been a pretty big supporter, vocal supporter. I'm reversing that today because after some real thought and prayer, we are not that people to open up this sacred document. We are not that people. That was a God-inspired document that was divinely written. You can read it from, I don't know how many different founders' viewpoints. The very hand of God was involved. He went on to say, I am not for opening up the Constitution anymore because we are not that people anymore. When we are that people, I will be for it again. When we've demonstrated our humility and our obedience to God, and I'm afraid it is going to take a massive beatdown of our country to get to that place, then I'll be for it again. Someday we'll be humble enough and we will recognize God, but that someday we will not be so arrogant. When we're those people, I'll support the Convention of States. But I withdraw my support, and I'm sorry to say that is because of the fact that this Constitution is wholly inadequate for anyone other than a religious and moral people. You recall that from John Adams, that we are not those people and we should not stain this document. And so some of you, my fellow colleagues, we have had that conversation. Do not just vote for this because you want it to go away. Are we that people? I will say this in all honesty, if I thought I could send Jordan Redmonds and everybody would be a Jordan Redmond, and I mean this sincerely, I'd probably support that. We are not you. I don't even think I'm you. That's how much respect I have for you, but we are not that people. And I will ask this committee to please say no.
Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a few comments. I spent a better part of a year proclaiming that I wouldn't be interested in this at all unless there was the rules were set up in place first for the delegates. And then lo and behold, they both showed up at the same time. And I was like, now what? But what I found a little surprising as I dug in, and I guess some states did it one way and some states did it another, that it is framed in a concurrent resolution and not legislation. This is not law. So that troubled me a little bit, that we didn't just put a bill through and make it a law, how the delegates would be governed. And then I began to dig a little deeper, and there does seem to be a lot of confusion over who gets to pick and how this is going to happen, because as I don't know who else hasn't looked at it. I've had it on my screen for a half an hour now. It's a very short statement in our Constitution. This Article 5, this thing that we know that our founders put there. So as I became a little bit more disillusioned with what I might have thought I'd done, I started to reach out, and I heard somebody, and I don't remember who it was. Somebody said on behalf of 105 million people in Idaho. Is that did anybody else hear that? Was I hearing things? Yeah, so that was heard. So we're 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds are demanding a constitutional convention. We only have 2-point-something million people in the entire state. And that's every man, woman, and child, including infants. But I started to call around in the areas. I have 5 counties, District 2, Clearwater, Benewah, Shoshone, part of Kootenai County, part of Bonner County. I began to call around, and I found out that in my district alone, the central committees that don't have a resolution against Article 5 are in the process of passing one, and are not, it isn't that it didn't pass, they just haven't had their meeting yet. And it was like, well, we're going to do it on Tuesday. And I told them that, well, I can't wait till Tuesday, but they were all confident that their central committees were behind this. And I spoke to other people in the areas. So I'm not seeing this overwhelming support in my district for this action. And because of that, I'm just going to have to remain a no.
Representative Handy.
For some discussion, please. I have been back and forth on this thing so many times that I can't even keep track of it. And I'm a very pragmatic person. And the end of the day, I guess I came to pragmatism is we have done nothing and nothing has happened. And we're looking at debt that is so huge now. I mean, if you can imagine if your personal debt was that and you were trying to pay just the interest, you would succumb in a heartbeat. So we're not succumbing because we're printing more money and everyone's complaining about inflation. So my feeling is nothing ventured, nothing gained. And there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of unknowns. I'll be the first to admit that, I'm not going to jump up and down and be real excited about what's going to happen. But I do believe that states and people in states can watch this process. We didn't have any of those dangers in the 1990s, but we can watch this process. And if it gets out of line, I think there's at least half of the states in the country who say, "Hey, this is not what we signed up for." It's not like we signed this thing and then the federal government's going to shove something down our throat. We're still the states, and we still have our rights, and we still have authority, and we still have numbers, and we still have lots of power on our side. So. And, and I feel very strongly about the Constitution as well. And I've been in lots of countries. My wife and I love to travel. We have it so good. And it's because of our Constitution and the way we live. And I've seen lots of constitutions, lots of countries that have tried to redo their Constitution and failed miserably. But we will fail miserably if we don't do something with debt. And we will fail miserably if we don't address career politicians, 40, 50, 60 years. I mean, it's amazing. I've been here 3 years and it's an eternity. I don't know what it'll be like to be in Washington for all those years. So my feeling is, and my vote will be cast just because what we've done is not working and I'm willing to take a risk to try something else. Thank you.
Representative Rubel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to speak against the motion. I would not say that we are in the dire circumstances that I'm hearing described today. We have the greatest nation on earth. We have the longest standing constitution on earth. These are not nothing. These are incredible achievements. And to risk throwing that away, I agree. The debt is bad. We should do something about that. But I think jeopardizing the very foundation of our nation is going too far to address a problem that can be addressed within our current structures. Our Constitution, the thing that makes it so amazing is the universal buy-in. We live in such a divided time. People can barely agree on what color the sky is. I mean, nobody agrees on anything. The only thing that everybody from Bernie Sanders to Steve Bannon can agree on is that we love our Constitution. This is something, and I couldn't agree more with Representative Ehart, this is something that will be lost. No question. I mean, we may come out with new amendments, et cetera, but they will not have the kind of buy-in that our current Constitution has. We might have a situation where some majority can ram something down the minority's throat, and then the minority will be bitter forever and looking for a way to reverse that. That is not a healthy way to approach a constitutional drafting process. That is not what we have right now. We have a sacred document that everybody in America believes in. This is so risky. And you'll hear some people say, "Oh, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about here." They will say with perfect confidence, there is no chance of a runaway convention. There is no chance of the ratification rules being changed. Nothing to worry about here. But let me tell you, you will find equally credentialed people on the other side, including Supreme Court justices, to say, absolutely, there's a risk of a runaway convention. Absolutely, they could change the ratification requirement. We don't know what the heck will happen when we turn these people, of whom we have no idea how they will be selected or what their mandate will be. We do not know what will happen when we turn them loose and what kind of constitution we will emerge with. The Constitution is too sacred to play Russian roulette with. And the one thing that we can be sure, again, you'll have people say no risk here. You'll hear people say absolutely no. There is risk. There is uncertainty. There is no question. There are enough highly credentialed people on both sides of this equation that the one certain thing is that there is uncertainty and risk. I think that as long as we have our Constitution, we have the tools to solve our problem. We have the tools to solve the debt. We have the tools to solve term limits. We have the tools to solve it all, as long as we have this beautiful, amazing Constitution that we all believe in. Without that, we have nothing. Without that, we face the total disintegration of our nation and whatever unity we have left. And are there some amendments that make sense? Sure, maybe. I think we should look at those and go through the traditional amendment process if that's what we want, where we can actually see the darn thing on paper in black and white, see the exact language, and decide if we want that or not. If we want a balanced budget amendment, let's put it in front of us in black and white where we all get to vote on it and see what we're voting on, not where we're turning a bunch of people in loose in a room. We don't know who, we don't know if any of us will have any say on that, and without any known guardrails around what process they undertake to rewrite our Constitution. That is terrifying. And I think, again, our Constitution's too precious. We need to stop this today, now. So I hope you will give this bill a no.
Representative Pohanka.
Mr. Chair, I tell you, this last week, I've gotten, I don't know how many emails, maybe hundreds, for and opposed to it. And it's just like, through my mind and my heart, I'm thinking, what's going to be the best? And I look at our debt, the debt, and we're 36.5 trillion in debt per citizen, $107,000, debt per taxpayer is 323,000. So all of us that pay taxes, we could all write a check right now for 323,000. We take care of this 36. And I do believe there's checks and balances that we have that we haven't used, and people need to be held accountable. Now, going back to Representative Ehart, total respect for you, young lady. Appreciate all you're doing. And just like you said, the Constitution is sacred, and I worry about changing it. I really do, and it scares me. And just as my government teacher always said, that's like the Holy Grail, that's the Bible. And I will be a no on this vote. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boy, we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of talk about the Constitution being sacred. It's sacred like America is. It's like this country is. This is divine. Our country is divine. And the Constitution is sacred. And if that's the case, what is the problem with Article 5? Because the founders put it in there for us to be able to revise it. If the government becomes tyrannical, and I wish I had the quote in front of me from George Mason as to why Article 5 was enacted, but it basically says that should the government become tyrannical, the government will never change itself. It is up to the people, it is up to the states which empower and create the government to do something about it. That's where we are now, folks. We are in trouble. Now we have had a very fortunate election, and there are some great changes being made, but it isn't always going to be that way. Things will change. The pendulum will swing the other way. And 5 or 10 years from now, we'll be sitting here. Well, some of you, I probably won't be. We'll be sitting here saying, oh my gosh, what do we do now? This tool is to be used by the states to correct what the federal government is doing. It is to be used to rein in the spending that is out of control, that will do terrible things in the future to our grandchildren, to my grandchildren. We talk about this not being the right time and that we're not the right people. I don't agree with that. It is the right time. We do have the right people. My friend Jordan Redmond, Representative Ehart, Representative Hawkins, Representative Mathias, I would be more than happy to see them go to a Article 5 convention. I would trust them with my country, because when we step into this house, we do sacred work. We know it. We feel it. This isn't going to the grocery store and picking something off the shelf because, yeah, it's good enough. No, we give a lot of thought to what we do. And that's what will happen in an Article 5 convention. What's likely to happen? It probably will result in no amendments being enacted. But what will happen is that the federal government will finally realize that the states are not just here to be stepped on and to be have money thrown at us to say, do this and do it the way I want you to do it. The federal government will realize that it is the states that create this government, that the states create this country. And that political act alone may be the most important thing that happens with an Article 5 convention. So I urge your yes vote.
Representative Schertz, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have so many passionate constituents on this issue, and many of them are here with us today. And on both sides of the issue, very conservative people who have a tremendous love for our Constitution and our country, just as I know everyone on this committee has as well. But the question that has been in my mind, and I know it's been sparked by so much of the conversation we had today, if you believe the Constitution is a divine document, which I agree, 100% agree with, then why is this in here if not to use? Why is this in here if not for a time such as this, right now, today? Why? Why? And as much conversation as I've had about this, I can't come to a thought except for when the people's voices need to be heard, that is there to be heard. And we're in a world of hurt. I still remember when I was 8 years old and my dad was talking to me at his kitchen table about the national debt. And I'm like, what is the heck is a national debt? But he was worried about it then. And it's only gotten worse and worse and worse. How do we stop it? Because how do we stop it? The citizens of our state can't stop it, but we can. This is such a big issue for us. You know, I was really trying to wrap my head around how do we stop this runaway convention? I think I'm satisfied with many of the answers. The fact that 3/4 of the states, either by convention or by the legislature, have to come. That gives me great assurance in what is going on. The bottom line is, though, this whole body, not just this committee, this whole body deserves to hear this issue. They do. Send it to the committee, send it to the floor, allow them to hear this issue and allow them to cast their vote. This is too big of an issue. This whole body deserves to hear it. So with that, I will vote yes. I urge you to vote yes and send this to the floor. Thank you.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, as I'm listening to the arguments back and forth, I can't help but think that there are things that we can actually do. And that in a way, if you just say, well, we're doing this convention states and this is going to solve the problem, now we don't have to worry anymore. And we can go back to our ways. But spending and borrowing is not just, has creeped up even in our own state legislature. I remember 30 years ago when I served in this legislature and bonding was proposed and it was rejected. That legislature did not want to borrow. They didn't believe in borrowing money for almost anything. And now, what do? Last year, we borrow $1 billion in bonding, authorize $1 billion in borrowing for school buildings because that's the way we want to finance it. We borrow $1 billion for roads because that's the way we're financing it. The spending and borrowing is happening here at this legislature. And there is something you can do to control or walk the walk, so to speak. Another thing is we've accepted all this ARPA money. Now, we're all complaining about the federal deficit. I would challenge people to look at where the ARPA money is being spent as to whether it's really necessary or it's going to provide any kind of real benefit. And I'll just give you one example that I've been talking about for 2 years is the Anderson Ranch raise, which started out at 80 million. It's now costing 125 million. And guess what? It's only going to hold water 38% of the time, and it's only going to hold about 27, it would be an average of 8,000 acre feet a year. So if we don't look at some of our own spending and this federal money that we're always accepting, then we're in a situation where we're just kind of saying, well, we're going to vote for this today. We've done our, or some are saying, we'll vote for this today and we've done our job, and it'll get fixed year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, and so don't worry about it. I think there are things we can do today that would help the situation.
See no further red lights. Oh, there's one more. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to share some thoughts. I've heard we need power in the states. We need to be heard from the states. We can be heard. We can be powerful if we'd be courageous. If we would turn down ARPA money, if we would say, federal government, we don't want your money for education because it's not your delegated authority. We don't want you involved in education. Everyone wants a quick fix, and I understand. We all know this has been lobbied heavily, and the citizens are frustrated. I think some of that frustration is they want a quick fix. They just want government to get better. But the problem is we have allowed our schools to teach communism pretty much. And people don't know how to engage in government. They don't know how to engage in government anymore. They don't even understand. I get calls from other districts that want me to vote a certain way, and they don't understand I do not represent them. I had someone tell me last week that I should listen to the governor because I work for him. And I was like, no, I don't work for him. So I guess everyone wants a quick fix. And I would say we're at a time in history. I mean, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I'd say we were heading into a civil war. North Idaho thought that. A lot of people in North Idaho thought that. I see opportunity. I don't think we're headed into a civil war over the next year or so. I see opportunity for change. I see opportunity to see where we're at. What I don't want is I don't want a confusing system, and I know everyone's got an idea on how this is going to roll out. Some people say the delegates are coming here, coming there, and we can get lost in the weeds all day long. But I don't think anyone knows, and I think the last thing we need right now in this country is confusion, distraction. I just think that the timing is not right for this. I do not believe this is the fix, because I believe we have the fix right here in our state. And so I'm encouraging you. This is a sacred document. It is something that has kept us together for a long time. And when we start opening that up and we think we're going to get something out of it, well, we're Idaho. I mean, we're going to be outnumbered by the big states, I'm pretty sure, depending on how the delegates are picked. We don't know how the delegates are picked. There's just too many questions. I'm not saying it's not a tool. I'm not saying it's not a tool we could use at some point. I just think the timing now is not what I think is the best for Idaho and where we're headed. And I think if you look across the country for states leading, we are there with deregulation. We are getting a hold of some of our spending. And I think now with what's going on at the national level, there is an opportunity for us to start turning down some of this federal fund and starting to lead for the rest of this nation on what we can do as a state. And so for those reasons, I'm going to be a no to send this to the floor.
Representative Pahanka.
So, Mr. Chair, listening to Representative Ehart and Representative Schertz, I'd like to make a motion to send to the floor without a recommendation.
That'd be a substitute motion to send to the floor without recommendation, correct? Okay, Representative Matthias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow something that Representative Hawkins said in the last few meetings, and that maybe watching House Concurrent Resolution 9 move through the process would bring some of us comfort, and that we hold off on House Concurrent Resolution 10. So I'd make an amended substitute motion to hold House Concurrent Resolution 10 at the call of the chair.
If you would correct that to a date certain, that would be a more correct motion on an odd day.
Mr. Chairman, I make an amended substitute motion to hold House Concurrent Resolution 10 in committee on a date certain, being Friday, February 21st.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Properly, and we're going to do a roll call vote. Properly before the committee is an amended substitute motion to hold HCR 10 until Friday, February 21st.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I guess quickly to speak to that motion, since
Go
we
ahead.
have three motions here, I'd prefer to have just voted it down. I know that, the committee, we've been tasked with doing the work. But we've got three motions to get, or two motions to get back to the original motion to say no. So I don't think it's fair to our colleagues to send it to the floor when we're the ones who've been tasked and asked to do the work, if we feel strongly that way. So I suppose on the third, I'll support it, but I hate to kick it down the road. That just, what we're doing by doing that is taking an issue that we've just dealt with right now and prolonging it. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on this from the committee. I'd be very curious to hear.
Looks like Representative Hawkins has some thoughts.
I thought we were going to vote.
Yeah, I have a comment on it.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm going to be a yes on holding it in committee, because otherwise it sounds like some people want to vote for it on the floor, and then so I'm going to be a yes.
See no further red lights.
Well then, Mr. Chairman,
One more.
I'm going to be a yes too then.
All right. When Nancy starts the voting, please turn your mics on. And as a reminder, the motion is an amended substitute motion to hold HCR 10 until Friday, February 21st in committee.
Chairman Skog,
No.
Vice Chair Alfieri,
No.
Representative Scott,
Yes.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Representative Erickson,
No.
Representative Garner,
No.
Representative Handy,
No.
Representative Hawkins,
Yes.
Representative Hill,
No.
Representative Hostetler,
Yes.
Representative Pohanka,
No.
Representative Schertz,
No.
Representative Gannon, Representative Matthias, Representative Rubel,
Motion fails 7-8. Next up is a substitute motion to send to the floor without recommendation.
Chairman Skog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Alfieri,
No.
Representative Scott,
No.
Representative Ehart,
No.
Representative Erickson,
Yes.
Representative Garner,
Yes.
Representative Handy,
Yes.
Representative Hawkins,
No.
Representative Hill,
No.
Representative Hostetler,
No.
Representative Pohanka,
Yes.
Representative Schertz,
Yes.
Representative Gannon,
No.
Representative Matthias,
No.
Representative Rubel.
Motion fails 6-9. I need to look at my Masons since we're going to go at ease.
You've been watching a hearing of the Idaho House Committee on Judiciary, Rules, and Administration in consideration of our Article 5 Convention of States legislation, referred to as HCR 10 as well as HCR 9, which is the 34 Ready Resolution authorized by COS action, setting the procedural rules for an Article 5 convention. And that one, that motion was in committee and it passed. Unfortunately, HCR 10, our Article 5 application, which is to rein in federal power to call the very first Article 5 convention, there was multiple motions that were made, and it seems that the motion that was voted on that failed was to send to the floor without a recommendation. It seems that that has failed. We have Regional Director Catherine Zamanek to comment on what we just saw.
Hi,
Hey there,
Andrew.
Catherine. Great to have you back. So there were so many motions going in different directions. Can you clear up what exactly happened? It seemed like 34 Ready that passed and is going to the floor for with a due pass recommendation, but that our HCR 10 is not. Is that correct?
Well, so far, I was sort of surprised there wasn't a motion just for a straight vote to do pass. So I was rather surprised that the committee just ended abruptly like it did. So yes, they did pass the 34 Ready or the faithful delegate or commissioner selection in committee, and we'll see what happens with that. I mean, that is sort of encouraging to me. I know it will be encouraging to the team. We now have a place to go where we have rules, and we can use that to convince next time around that it's now time to call the convention. Although we know it's time to call the convention, we know our country's in trouble, and frankly, I didn't agree with Representative Scott, who said now's not the time. Well, it's hard to believe it's not the time. We know what's happening, and we know it's not going to get any better. I mean, of course, we're all happy with what DOJ is doing, but none of that is permanent. So we want permanent solutions.
Right. Yeah, that was something that was very interesting for me too, Catherine. Just seeing how now is the time to really enact some dramatic change, and it seems that the option that was chosen was, well, let's just wait and do nothing. I think at one point, this was not the committee, but someone testifying said we should put this in the freezer and just let it sit. And I thought that was an interesting thing because people want change. We have the people on our side. Over 80% of the American people agree with what we're doing. So it just seemed odd that the direction that some of these committee members want to go is do nothing. Well, how do you feel though about 34? I mean, you commented on 34 Ready and how this is still a victory going to the House, and hopefully this will ameliorate some of the fears that people have. But how are you feeling about what's the next step going forward with our Article 5 application, and what do the grassroots do next?
Well, I feel disappointed, obviously, that they didn't take up the resolution for the application. I do feel as if, our team is strong enough. Now, what's going on? I don't know. Now, are we going back to the committee? looks like.
To the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Okay, we're
We'll do a
gonna,
roll call
I
vote.
figured they had to have that vote.
Chairman Skog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Alfieri,
Yes.
Representative Scott, Representative Ehart,
No.
Representative Erickson,
Yes.
Representative Garner,
Yes.
Representative Handy,
Yes.
Representative Hawkins,
No.
Representative Hill,
Yes.
Representative Hostetler,
No.
Representative Pohanka,
Yes.
Representative Schertz,
Yes.
Representative Gannon, Representative Matthias, Representative Rubel.
Motion carries 8-7. That concludes our work for today.
There you go.
Catherine, that seems to be an exciting turn of events. That was
Yes.
a recommendation 8-7 do pass. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is correct. I'm hearing that Chairman Skog needed to check his Mason's rules. That's why he didn't move forward with the do pass. So he checked Mason's rules just to make sure he was correctly using procedures. So we've got a do pass out of the Idaho committee, and
Wow.
praise God.
Praise God. Absolutely. That's amazing. You know, just the different motions back and forth. I mean, I don't know how you keep track of that. Obviously, he needed to go back and check the rules. So it makes sense that I got a little lost and that we got a little lost as well.
I was lost
Well,
too. I thought we were done.
how do you feel now that 8-7, we have 2 victories, 34 already passed, our Article 5 resolution passed. We're headed to a full floor vote. How are you feeling now?
I am so proud of the team, honestly. They have worked so hard and they've prayed about this for weeks now. We've got some work to do. We understand that, here's the thing about having these hearings. It certainly gives us an opportunity to hear from those legislators to know what their concerns are. If we don't have the debate, we really don't get to hear it. So we can have those conversations with those folks who have the fears or who have questions yet. So I'm super excited about what we just saw. Honestly, I think it was a great time spent, great debate back and forth. And, it's a good day for Convention of States.
Absolutely. So what's gonna happen next, and what's the call to action to the grassroots right now?
I think the call to action is going to be to contact the representatives when we get a floor vote. We'll find out when that's going to be. This is going to help us in the Senate. We know we have a lot of support over in the Senate. We've got a great sponsor there. And so it, as the word gets out that the committee passed it over there, it's going to only inspire the senators who support us to get up and become those champions that we know they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, Catherine, congratulations to you and to the entire Idaho team. Y'all are just doing amazing work. And this is so exciting to see that both 34 Ready and our Article 5 application has made it through the committee and is now going to the House floor. We're going to be praying for you and for the team, and we're going to be praying for those legislators that they make the right decision and vote yes on both pieces of these legislation.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for being here today. Thank Rita for being here today. This commentary is so important to our grassroots to hear it back and forth. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of the support we have out there for the Convention of States.
All right, Catherine, we're going to have you back when we see another victory in Idaho or in one of your other states. We got to have you.
Well,
back
hey, tomorrow's Iowa. So watch for us
right.
to come out of subcommittee tomorrow in Iowa. It's a busy time in the flyover region.
That's right. And that's going to be at 9 o'clock Eastern time. Is that correct?
9 Eastern. Yeah. Yes. You want to
All
get up
right.
early?
It's a little too early for me. Kids aren't even out of bed yet. So I got to drop them off to school, but I will be with you in prayer that we will be successful in the Iowa subcommittee. So,
And
but
by
I
the
will
way,
be celebrating after with you.
both the 34 ready and the resolution will be heard in Iowa tomorrow. Different subcommittee times, but they'll both be heard tomorrow. So pretty exciting.
Well, very exciting, been a very exciting Monday. We're looking to an exciting Tuesday. Until then, Catherine, we got work to do. We got a country to save. So let's get back to work.
Remember,
Thanks for tuning in,
all right.
everyone. Thanks for joining
Thanks,
us, Catherine.
everyone. Good night now.